Dual booting Windows and Linux on the same drive is not only possible, but I would argue that it's the safest way for new users to begin trying out Linux. Welcome one and all, my name is DDashUnknown, and I welcome you all to the first tutorial video I've ever made in the history of my channel, and will hopefully be one of the more memorable of all the Linux videos you've ever seen. This guide is broken up into multiple sections, starting with what I call section 0 actually, as I want to give a bit of a preamble and motivation for why I'm doing this at all. Not only that, but I've also written out some documentation for you to follow, written section by section, just like in this video and the presentation. And I designed this guide such that you can follow along with all the documentation side by side as you watch this video. Whether you want to just watch the guide, listen to the guide, or you want to have the documentation alongside you. My goal is to make this process as simple, as thorough, and as helpful as possible, as every how-to video should. So if you want to take a look at it, head to d-unknown.neocities.org/dual-boot-guide. This is where I'll be providing a lot of resources, links, and additional important updates to the guide. So we'll first start off with some motivation. This is quite obvious to most people who run Windows at some point or another. We have Microsoft's abhorrent business practices and enshittification, of which there's so many people who are stuck in the Microsoft ecosystem and really feel those impacts. We'll start off with the obvious. There's Copilot being injected into so many different apps, including the most basic ones like Notepad and Paint. There's the Windows 11 operating system, the lie that Microsoft said Windows 10 would be the last one, and even before the rise of AI, the design decisions of Windows 11 were objectively worse than Windows 10. There's also telemetry, privacy, and security. We live in a late-staged surveillance capitalism hellscape, where so much of what we do and say is being logged and tracked in every which way you can think of. And even before all that, Windows 10 also had issues before Windows 11 came to the scene. I refer to bloatware and other just strangely not optimized settings as the defaults, which slow down people's workflows and overall yield a much worse performance. With the probably almost, if not already, decade-old meme at this point of every year being the supposed year of the Linux desktop. And it's often referred to as the solution a lot of people say, just switch to Linux. And to that I say yes, but to really untether users from the absolute grip that Microsoft holds on so many people, we really need to address the actual barriers that prevent much of the user base from doing so. The reality is that not everyone can or even wants to move away from Windows, at least not fully. And you can see that I color-coded these two for a reason. In terms of how not everyone can, we first have a single bad experience at a critical moment. It's a single, really bad instance where software fails the user when they need it most, and because of that risk and the inability to find an alternative in time, because time is money, that's essentially what I mean by single bad experience. That essentially sours your perception, and you really don't want that experience to happen ever again. For a ton of factors completely out of your control, you want to go back to Windows to retain that control and also retain that certainty that the software you use will work when you need it to the most. Then we also have some unsupported apps for your workflow. This is where I refer to Office 365, and no, I will not be calling it Copilot 365, thank you very much, as well as the Adobe Creative Cloud and certain games that run kernel-level anti-cheats. Games such as, I believe, Valorant and Fortnite. Certain quote-unquote industry standard software that a lot of users are forced to continue using because a lot of people have had experience in this software for probably over a decade in most cases, I would say, where the software back then was so good and just worked. You paid a one-time license, you didn't have to pay subscriptions, and people have invested so much time into using this software that unfortunately enshittification slowly creeps its way in over time at a slow enough rate where users start noticing cracks in the experience, but they're already so invested in the software that they use that the cost of learning a completely different workflow is simply too high for them to ultimately, tying this back into the guide, switch away from Windows to Linux. This is by far the biggest reason why a lot of folks cannot switch away. They simply need their apps to work, and not only do they work independently, they also work with others, so everyone has to be on the same page in terms of the software they use. Not everyone has the privilege to just switch, unfortunately. Now we get into the wanting territory, or rather, lack thereof, because of other bad experiences people can have. For example, we have hostile, gatekeeping Linux evangelists. A lot of them say in various forum posts, you should know this already, and then a lot of them brag about how their specific distro and setup is the best. I use Arch, by the way, is a popular meme where it's essentially running a very difficult version of Linux. It becomes this sort of skill ladder game where you're kind of expected to really dive deep into using your computer to really embrace the Linux life, rather than just having Linux be an actual useful tool for you in your workflow. And overall, this attitude of just trying to be superior to one another rather than helping out one another and fostering a healthier community. The other reason why is because folks have tried to install it and have failed to install it long term. It's kind of similar to a single bad experience, but not actually at a critical moment. It's just the process that when they look at it, they see it, they get overwhelmed, they view it as daunting and quite time consuming, which is quite fair. This is what I hope to address, really defang and decommission a lot of the myths surrounding Linux, as well as the hostility surrounding the ecosystem. There's a lot of friendly folks out there, but unfortunately, the fewer hostile folks out there are indeed the loudest. The age-old tale of internet culture. Now we're going to get into who this how-to guide is for and why it stands out. There are 3 conditions that I believe most people will be in terms of their circumstances who want to try out this guide. So first up, they want to try out and or switch to Linux long term, and they cannot or do not want to abandon Windows entirely, and also they want to safely dual boot Windows and Linux on the same drive. This last point is especially contentious in the Linux community and especially among Linux experts. A lot of them will very simply straight up tell you that dual booting Windows and Linux on the same drive is not a good idea at all. And the experts are very much saying this for a good reason. Windows 11 updates can absolutely destroy your Linux installation on the same drive. What can happen is a Windows 11 update will see that not all the storage on your drive is recognizable to Windows, so it views that as an error and tries to clean it up. Which unfortunately means that the entirety of your Linux install is completely wiped and overwritten, with all that storage just simply going back to Windows on its own. I've never had that experience myself. I simply know this information secondhand from all the Linux videos that I've been watching in 2026, the year that I'm recording this in. Also, I forgot to mention this earlier, I have been daily driving Linux seriously for a few months now, and have also daily drived it for a few months in years prior. The conversation on this usually ends at just install it on another drive and don't bother with ever putting it on the same drive. This is where I'm going to deviate from even the perspective of a ton of Linux experts out there by saying I actually disagree with this notion. To say that dual booting off the same drive is a for sure terrible idea, unfortunately, I do think that type of mentality is holding back a certain set of people who would want to try Linux, but simply can't because they have only one laptop, only one computer, only one big drive, and they cannot afford another, or don't have the technical know-how to anyway. Alright, I just made a quick change here. Not everyone has the luxury of a separate internal drive slot in their laptop. For example, imagine a user who only has a laptop and they don't even have a dedicated slot for a different drive. So because of that, unfortunately, it simply isn't something I just want to take lying down. Especially in the AI age where SSDs are just ludicrously expensive alongside RAM and GPUs, all of it is really forcing users to think outside the box in terms of what they can do with the computing resources that they already have. And because of that, and the fact that a lot of the hardware is capable of doing so, that is the absolute core motivation as to why I made this guide. In summary on this, we need to find a way to install Windows safely without updates that break Linux. And fortunately for us, we do have a solution. There is a completely free and reliable way to do so. What you'll need is to install this version of Windows called Windows 10 Enterprise IoT LTSC 2021. I know that's a mouthful, we will get into that later on, don't worry. In general, the only real catch to this guide is that you will need to set aside some time because it is quite a step-by-step process with a lot of steps ultimately. So it will require some of your patience as well to allow various operations to finish. Nothing will take an extremely long amount of time, I believe, with the exclusion of essentially backing up your files, which is a very, very recommended step to keep all of your files safe. Most folks should be doing that already, but if not, I'll show you how to do so using an amazing app that works across all platforms, Windows, Mac, and Linux. And finally, it really is going to exercise your ability to learn new skills and take a few steps outside of your comfort zone. You're not going to experience any major discomfort with this long term. You might see a few screens that feel overwhelming, but don't worry, I'll explain and guide you every step of the way. For the first major section of this guide, we have the pre-setup process. First up, we're going to need some physical equipment. So while you're not necessarily going to be paying any money on the software front, you will obviously need to do so on the hardware front. But don't worry, there's nothing you need beyond these 3 items right here. you will absolutely need a single USB flash drive, with 16 gigabytes being the recommended minimum. Technically, it can be done with an 8GB USB drive, but even then, I don't think most places even sell them, so it's not so much of a worry there. But the bottom line here is the more storage, the merrier, and the more drives themselves, the merrier. For example, I have a 5-pack of multicolored 64GB USB drives. If you only have a single USB drive, this will still work for you. It's just that you'll need to continuously reformat it and change what's on it constantly and do a lot of drive wiping. The more drives you have, the less wiping you need to do essentially. Next up, and most obviously, you're going to need a PC running Windows. This can be the machine you want to dual boot, or it could be a second PC, which is more ideal for backup and recovery. In the event that you need to download something from a different computer and transfer it over via a USB, that's why more than one is recommended here. Just having a second Windows PC in a certain situation where you need to suddenly execute a Windows program, but suddenly your main PC is not capable of running Windows at a very particular moment, it's always good to have a second Windows system at the ready, just in case you need it. And finally, a super strong recommend is to have an external drive, or even a separate internal drive for backing up your files. One last note here regarding a PC running Windows. You can see here the Windows 10 start menu. This is what I was mentioning earlier. Even back in the days of Windows 10, there are so many tiles in the start menu. A lot of them are ads, a lot of them are bloat, a lot of them are apps that you never need to use. And this is what we're going to be focused on debloating as part of this guide. Now it's time to focus on the software you're going to need for this. First up, we have the Windows 10 version that I mentioned earlier, IoT Enterprise LTSC. Now that's a mouthful. Breaking down the acronyms here, we have IoT, meaning Internet of Things, so anything that can have an internet connection. Unfortunately, that list is getting too strong, with internet being in your fridge, potentially your toaster. I think that's a meme, but it's very much could be possible. And so many of the technologies that we use shouldn't have internet functionality at all, but they do, and that's what IoT is for. Then there's enterprise, which is a very fancy word for saying something is geared towards business, so enterprise grade means meant for businesses, not necessarily consumers. And then we have LTSC, which stands for long-term servicing channel. Pardon everything shifting to the left, I just wanted to expand this out. This is ideally what we want, because it's a version of Windows which will have a lot of security updates for a long time. This version of Windows is meant for devices like kiosks, such that they just work, which sounds like what consumers want. They want a device that just works, does what they tell the computer to do, and not just completely make decisions for them. One thing I didn't mention before is the rise in agentic operating systems. Not to worry, this version has zero AI to speak of anywhere. If we actually go back to the box art of Windows 10, this version is specifically 2021, which is an entire year before the AI onset. So in short, this is a completely AI-free version of Windows right out of the box. Unlike what the words enterprise and kiosks might imply, it is perfectly capable of running on most computers. So this is the version of Windows we're going to be installing, and we'll discuss more of it later on. You can check the documentation for download links to the ISO file that you'll need, which is essentially a file containing all of the instructions for installing the operating system. Next up, we have an app called Rufus. This is a simple one that creates bootable USB drives and flashes ISOs to them. In terms of the verb flashing here, you can think of flashing as simply the process of formatting a USB drive such that a computer can boot from them. That's all you really need to think about it as, and I will be showing you how to use this software later on. Finally, we have an app called Free File Sync. It's essentially a folder comparison and sync software that optimizes the process of making backups. Backups, as many should know, are super important to keeping your files safe, but unfortunately, the process of backing up files effectively can be quite the daunting task, where folks get so busy that they simply forget to copy files over to external drives, and they might not necessarily catch every single file they need either. This app is amazing, and I would argue a must-have for every single computer user. The way it works is that it determines differences in folder structure and transfers only what is absolutely needed. It's open source, free, and available on Windows, Mac, and Linux. It's so easy to install, it's so easy to use, there's no performance lag, you can see everything that's happening in real time, and not only that, but you can also see a very detailed visual view as well, where every single change is updated instantly. But more on that in a bit. Finally, on the software front, you will likely need to download Wi-Fi drivers for your Windows PC. This is recommended to do so to be absolutely safe. You may get lucky and have your fresh Windows install recognize your computer's Wi-Fi chips, but this is not a guarantee. The Wi-Fi will be supported for your computer out of the box, especially on a laptop. It's more likely that your Wi-Fi drivers will be recognized on a desktop PC. I'm just speaking from my experience here, but it really depends on your hardware, and I can't really speak to every individual on this. So to be safe, please download the Wi-Fi driver installation files for your specific computer. This process will be different for everyone because there's a bunch of different models, a bunch of different motherboards, types, chipsets, all that. Do find a model or serial number for your computer. If you do find it, go to the manufacturer's website and use it if possible. As I just mentioned, I have a laptop, specifically an Acer Nitro 5, and here I would first search up Acer Nitro 5 Wi-Fi driver, go to the official Acer website, then enter the serial number to find the exact Wi-Fi drivers for it. If you can't find it, do see the column on the right. For custom-built desktop PCs, you will need to find the Wi-Fi drivers for your specific motherboard. In any case, use an app called Specky to easily find this information out, or you can just follow the instructions written in the documentation. I go into more detail there, and the documentation is able to discuss in more length all of those critical details that you need, especially for installing Wi-Fi drivers here, that I just simply cannot go into in video form, especially in terms of providing links. So do check out that section of the guide. On to section 2 now. Here's where we'll be focusing on backing up your files. This won't be an in-depth walkthrough on file backups by any means, and instead I'll briefly discuss my version of a best practice. You could just copy over a specific folder, and that could be completely fine for you. I use an app called FreeFileSync, the best app for backing up files in my opinion. What you're seeing here is the FreeFileSync interface. There is a lot to look at here, but you really only need to focus on mainly the top and a bit of what's on the bottom. Everything in the middle here is just the entire 2-column file tree structure, and essentially what happens on the left most likely will be transferred to the right, but it can go in the opposite direction as well. On the top left, you have specific base functionalities such as creating a new session, opening an existing session, and saving sessions as well. This is really useful for if you want to have a specific configuration of settings for a specific type of operation you want to use with FreeFileSync, and you want to save it for future use, you can do that as well. Just click on that specific file it saves, and you can open it back up in FreeFileSync. I just mentioned the 2 columns where you have a source and a destination folder, and it can operate as well vice versa. You can just hit this rotation icon where you can swap the 2 folder paths. Up here is where you have the operations that you want to use. There are predefined ones, but also you can configure your own custom ones. Beyond that, you also have just very particular control. You can see a bunch of green arrows going right here. You can change the operation as you'd like. And down here, you can see essentially some of the different operation types that FreeFileSync will do. Then in the bottom right here, you can just see the amount of storage that will be transferred from left to right. It's not an overwhelming interface by any means, just takes a little bit of time to wrap your head around, and once you do, this is a phenomenal program for backing up all your files. This is actually the computer I'm going to be doing the guide with. The setup that I have actually allows me to switch from the presentation to my laptop screen at will. That's the power of a $300+ capture card. So I'm putting it to good use because I rarely get any use out of it already. So what you're going to see here with this very simple desktop, there's very little on here. I cleared out all of my important files, so there's not much to look at. But essentially, when I double click the interface here, this is the configuration I have before, where I have a C drive, essentially C users D-U, the shorthand for my username. I also have an F drive here, which is essentially, in my case, a simple USB drive. But in your case, it would be an external drive because you would have a lot more files to transfer. So what we're going to do here, if I go to browse just to make sure my drive is correct, it's a different letter entirely. I have here D-Black. So let's click it and select the folder. Once we do, actually I'm going to go into it and click D-U. What I recommend here is finding your user folder and copying that up. You can do the entirety of your C drive if you want, but be prepared for a lot of files there. In any case, make sure that the structure is consistent. Let's say it's folder 1 and then / folder 2. And then let's do also backups here. And then Windows laptop backup and then D-U. What you can do here is essentially the very last folder should be the exact same. You don't technically need to. It just really helps you with folder structure, especially because you may be tempted to copy and paste a specific single folder rather than selecting everything inside it and place it entirely inside your user folder. We can go to settings here and see just a lot of additional information. This is actually the same menu, comparison, filter, and synchronization. Each of these have their own settings. They all just refer to the same menu here. We'll get into this more in a bit. The first thing you're going to want to do is click the compare button here. You may get certain warnings here. I've created an entire folder structure that does not exist. So let's get rid of that and go all the way here back to your drive letter and then colon backslash and then your entire path as needed. You can just click browse and select it. So if I go to browse here, once again, the D drive here, and then I click DDashU, and then it appears here. Then I click compare. Some errors you might get are that you cannot open a directory because either access is denied or certain file is in use. Overwhelming majority of the time, you can simply click ignore all because it's referring to a specific file or folder that you don't actually care about copying over. For example, this is in app data and it's whatever WinSat is. If you don't know what it is, it's safe to ignore because it's just a default Windows process that's being used. So what you can do is simply click ignore all, and then what it's going to do is scan for all of the files and folders. And then if we scroll down, we have everything from our user folder. You can see because the right folder is empty, everything is going to get copied over. That's what this right arrow and the plus sign is. Next up, you can click the filters menu, and then you have essentially here an include and exclude filter. This star is essentially a wildcard character, and you will absolutely want to keep this because this is what signals to the program to just pull everything, and then you can further exclude. I have a whole exclusion configuration. You can leave the defaults here and be fine. It's just going to take longer. And with clever exclusions, you can essentially speed up the process more. But since this is for demonstration purposes, the file transfer is going to be done super quick. You can check the documentation if you want to save some more time. So we're going to just click OK here. And then we're going to go to synchronization, which is just the third tab. Here we have our different variants. So we have two-way, we have mirror, and we have update. So you can hover over each option and you can see exactly what happens in each of them. There's even a custom one as well. Two-way and update have a pretty similar convention, just different operations that get applied. And then the mirror and custom operations are pretty similar. With mirror and custom, you can think of them as if-then statements. So if item exists on the left side only, copy the new item to the right, and you can just hover over each of these to see what the rules are. For the most part, you will be sticking to these three specific operations, but if you want to dive deeper, you can. As well as what happens when you delete and overwrite. Either recycling bin deletes, you can do permanent deletes, and you can do file versioning as well. This software is so good that I actually paid to get the donation edition and support the developer. It is such an amazing program, and you're going to see just how blazing fast it is. So what you can do is click this right arrow and then select your specific operation. So two-way, mirror, and update. So if I click mirror, you can see all the operations are the same because the folder on the right is empty. And then you're gonna click. It'll prompt you to start the synchronization now if you want. It's just a repeat of the menu in the bottom right. Good for confirmation in case you missed it down here. It's essentially transferring 5.42 gigabytes from my user folder to my USB drive. For the most part, you can just ignore all. If you see an error that you don't feel like you want to continue, you can just click cancel and then reconfigure your settings there. But I'm going to click ignore all. We're going to open up the synchronization in full screen, and you're going to see just how blazing fast it is. In terms of near instant updates, like every single change that ever gets made, you can see the numbers updating in real time. You have a very nice graph view where you have the number of megabytes per second here. Usually, if it follows a consistent megabytes per second, it'll follow a specific line trajectory here, whatever you want to call it. Sometimes it might jump a bit, sometimes it might stay static, but eventually you will reach the top of this peak here. And then in terms of items per second, it depends on what type of file it is. For example, I already downloaded the ISO file already, so this is just what's getting transferred. You can see the percentage slowly going up, but when you're copying over a bunch of tiny files, you'll see this number shoot up as well. I also want to show you just in the bottom right here, you have exit, system sleep, and shut down. You can select any of these three operations when everything is finished, but just to really show you the power of this program, I'm just going to let the app do its thing and it'll show you the results at the end. You can also pause and stop the operations at any point if you realize something went wrong or you want to halt an operation while you're transferring something else. It might be better to wait for one to finish completely and then start another, but that I leave up to you. And if something goes wrong, you can just stop it. Now that the ISO file is almost finished copying over, you're going to see just how fast the rest of the files actually transfer over. This is going to hit 100, and then you're going to see that the item starts to jump up. Now it's at 11, 14, 17, 23. You can see just how quickly each of the files are getting transferred. Sometimes it gets a little slow, it's not always super fast, but what's beautiful is that nothing will halt, nothing will freeze, and then every single time there's an update to be made, this program will be there to update it for you every step of the way. Every single file, every single transfer, every single rate of change that occurs, it's there for you. And once it's finally done, if there are any errors, it will show you what each of them are. These are all essentially locked by another process, used by another process, or access denied. Because I chose to copy my user folder, some of these files will inevitably be used by another process. These are files that are generated by Windows and used by Windows, so when you're doing a fresh reinstall, these files you do not need to update anyway. One last thing about Free File Sync before we wrap up, we can click compare one more time, click ignore all, and we can see that the list is much smaller. We only have a few items we can copy over because these are ones that are in use by the system, but everything else is the same. And that concludes my segment on Free File Sync and Section 2. Now we head into Section 3, the first hands-on section of this whole guide. This is where we'll be doing the initial Windows setup, so be sure to have your ISO file ready. If you don't have it downloaded right now, please pause the video and do so. Download it from a link in the documentation, specifically section 1.2 if you haven't already. Once your ISO is downloaded and ready to go in your downloads folder or wherever you decided to save it, here's an easy step-by-step walkthrough of flashing a USB drive with Rufus. So you can pause the video now and read the instructions here. They are also in the documentation, but I'm just going straight to my laptop screen and I'm going to show you exactly what to do. So it's at this point where you'll want to take the USB drive you're going to be installing Windows to and just plug it into your system here. You'll want to go to wherever you download Rufus. If you just do it to your downloads folder, you'll find it there. Click yes on the security prompt and you'll be brought to this menu. You'll see here, I already have my USB drive formatted entirely. So for you, what will be listed in device is different. So if in the event your single USB is not selected, please be sure that Rufus is pointing to the exact USB drive you want to install the ISO file to. Then we're ready to get started. First, you'll go to boot selection and ensure that it's on the default disk or ISO image. So please select this option right here. This is the one that users will have by default, so make sure it's set to that. Then you'll want to click select. Here you'll want to navigate to wherever you download your ISO file to, which in this case is the downloads folder. So you'll see here en-us, Windows 10, IoT Enterprise, LTSC 2021, x64 DVD. So you'll want to click this and click open, and what this will do is set the boot selection to exactly this ISO file and configure most of the options already. But let's walk you through them one by one. So under image option, you'll see standard Windows installation and Windows to go. Just leave it as the standard. Next up, with this partition scheme, there are two options here, MBR and GPT. I expand on this in the documentation a lot more about which option to use, but just for a general rule of thumb, if your hardware is relatively recent, and I'm talking about in the past decade, so anything 2015 onwards, it's not a hard and fast rule. Stuff that's older could work just fine, you'll want to select GPT. Or if you know your hardware is super old, consider selecting MBR. Regardless, if the installation process fails with GPT, you can select MBR after. So we'll leave it as GPT, and the target system will always have one option here, UEFI. I also discussed the acronyms between UEFI and BIOS, so if we go to MBR, we have BIOS here. BIOS and UEFI refer to the same thing. It's essentially a menu where you can select a lot of settings for your computer in general. That's all you need to know about it here. So we're going to switch back to GPT. You don't have to show any advanced drive properties. We can move on to the volume label and you can just name it as you like. I would recommend changing the name to something recognizable. So we can do Windows 10 IoT Enterprise LTSC. You can just name it as follows, or you can have it as a shorthand. It's always good to have the volume label be something that you recognize, such that when you plug in the USB drive, let's say months or years in the future when you want to use it again, you'll know exactly what's on it before you wipe and reformat it. And my personal recommendation is to always have a USB formatted exactly like this and have it at the ready in cases where you need to reinstall Windows due to perhaps a certain Windows install going wrong. It's really important to have one formatted to get back up and running as soon as you can. Leave the defaults for the file system and the cluster size, and then you'd click start. Once you do, you have this Windows user experience pop up where you can customize your Windows installation even further. So you can create a local account with your username right away. If you want to have this box checked, you can just name your local account username whatever you'd like. You can keep it the same as your current system. So mine is D-U, and I will be keeping it the same. And you can also select the next two options, regional options with the same value as this user's, objectively good time saver. And down here, obviously when it comes to disabling data collection, skip all the privacy questions possible and set them all to their absolute minimums. So once you click OK, the process would start, and what would happen is in this ready bar, it would essentially fill up green from left to right. Because I already have my USB drive formatted, I don't need to actually click OK. In your case, you would click OK and wait for it to finish. Heading back to the presentation now, we'll be discussing the BIOS/UEFI menu. BIOS stands for Basic Input-Output System, and UEFI stands for Unified Extensible Firmware Interface. Think of these two as interchangeable terms for your system's base functionality, as described before. So if you see the acronym BIOS or the acronym UEFI, just assume that they refer to the same thing for our purposes. Now this is the part of the guide where I ask that you pay the utmost attention because this is the most vital and most difficult step in the entire process. This is a step where most people who wish to install Linux tend to turn away because they're so afraid of breaking their system when they access menus they don't recognize. Being scared is natural and we're gonna get through it anyway. Just follow my lead and everything will be okay. So to get into your BIOS/UEFI settings, you can use any of the three methods. The first one I call the boot up button mash method. Here, you'll restart your computer normally, then repeatedly press one of the predetermined buttons on your computer as it turns on. Common ones are F2, F10, F12, delete, or otherwise. This is dependent on the manufacturer and what they've decided to configure, like Acer, Asus, MSI, Dell, HP, whatever computer brand that you have, the button will be different. So find the one that applies to your system. Instructions on this are linked in the documentation, specifically in section 3.2.1. You can also do the shift restart method, where you essentially hold down shift as you restart, and you'll be presented with a list of options. You select the following in this order, going to troubleshoot, advanced options, UEFI firmware settings, and then restart. And finally here is the command line method, which is quickest for users who are comfortable with using the terminal, which is a very nice to have, and we will be using the terminal a bit in this guide, but nothing too extensive. So first you'll want to right click on the start menu, click Windows PowerShell as an admin, then yes on the security prompt. Then you copy paste the following command and run it. This is where you'll essentially trigger the shutdown command. This /R stands for restart, /T equal to 0 in seconds, so just restart right away, and then /FW, which stands for firmware. What we're going to be doing here specifically is the shift restart method. So first what you're going to want to do is head into the start menu here, click it, then click the power button, hold down shift, make sure your cursor's over restart. You can see that it's on shift, and then click restart. You'll be restarted into this menu here, so choose an option, continue, use your device, troubleshoot, or turn off your PC. Just go into troubleshoot, then advanced options, and then you'll see this option here, UEFI firmware settings. So you'll want to click this, and then click restart. What's going to happen here is you'll be booted directly into the menu, and this is the method that is best when it comes to applying to all systems. Now you see that we're in the menu. If you see a screen similar to this, you'll know you've done it correctly. Once you boot into the interface, the screen I just showed you, you'll then boot into the USB drive. Let's actually familiarize ourselves with the interface. This part of the process varies because of how different the interfaces are. That's why it's super important to pay attention here. I will show you two of the most common interface types up next, one of which will most likely apply to you. In both interface cases, do navigate to the boot menu if it's available, or you can switch the boot priorities such that you boot into your USB drive. So in this specific slide, we have the first type of interface, one where you can navigate with the mouse and keyboard. You can see that there's a mouse cursor here, and you navigate the menus in a very similar way as you would with just any standard Windows application. There's a lot to look at here, especially in terms of hardware information, but for our purposes, we're going to be focusing on menus that say boot priority and boot menu. Boot priority is up here. We have in this list solely the Windows Boot Manager, but we'd have other options if we have a bootable USB plugged in or other operating systems. Once you have your USB plugged in, it'll either be second or first in the list. If it's second in the list, you can drag it up to the first and then boot into it. But alternatively, and what I recommend doing, is selecting the boot menu. Here pressing F8 specifically on Asus motherboards. The instructions will be different based on your motherboard, but hopefully you will be able to find this menu. And the second interface type is very similar to the one that I'm using, because I'm using my laptop as the demonstration device. So what you'll see here is a bunch of menus up here that you'll navigate to with your keyboard. So just clicking left and right on your keyboard will allow you to select the specific menu, and then you use your arrow keys to select your specific item. So now switching back to the camera view, we're going to be navigating through the keyboard interface in this guide. Just going right in the menu until boot, we see the boot priority order. Anything that says Windows Boot Manager refers to your specific Windows install. Then below it is the USB drive. Now what you could do is with F5 and F6, so if I zoom out here, if I press F6, you can see that the order changes and I put the USB drive on top. You can do this if you'd like. If you keep your USB drive plugged in and then restart, Once you successfully install Windows, it'll just take you right back to the beginning of the installation process because it's specifically booting into your USB disk once again. Even though Windows is already installed and Windows Boot Manager is ready to go for you to continue setting up your system, you will have to come back to the menu again, go down to the Windows Boot Manager, move the order back up to the top. What we're going to be doing instead, if I go back to the main menu here, I have an option called F12 Boot Menu. It's actually disabled by default, so if I press enter, then you can see here, there's an option for disabling and enabling it. So if I go to disabled, it disables it, and if I go to enable, it enables it. If you have access to a boot menu, do specifically press that. Once you have all your settings configured as you'd like them, you're going to hit, most likely across computers, F10. F10 is the save and exit button that I believe most of you will use. You'll see this prompt to save configuration changes and exit. So you'll want to press enter to do so, and then what you'll want to do, in my case, I'm going to mash F12 to hopefully go into the boot menu. So mashing it some more here, we can see Acer there, excellent. And here you'll see which option you can boot into. So we have the boot manager and we have the USB. Use the arrow keys to navigate specifically to your USB disk, and then press enter. And then once you do, restarting once again, there we go, we see the loading menu right here, and then we're booted straight into the Windows installation menu. So now we're gonna do the step-by-step process here. Unfortunately, my capture card doesn't actually register the specific setup menu here, so I'm going to have to record this on my phone. Unfortunately, when it comes to Windows 10 IoT Enterprise LTSC specifically, you'll only have the United States. So this is a very English-only process. Then with your keyboard or input method, most users will just leave the defaults here. Then you'll want to click next. Then you'll want to click install now. And then you're brought to this Activate Windows menu. Click I don't have a product key. You'll be given two options here, Enterprise LTSC and IoT Enterprise LTSC. Make sure, very important, you have the second option selected. So once you do, click that and click Next, accept the license terms, and then you'll be prompted for which type of installation you'll want to use. The upgrade will not work, especially when it comes to transferring from one specific Windows version to another. A lot of you will likely have the home, and some of you might have the professional editions of, let's say, Windows 11. But even with Windows 10, this option will not work. What you'll want to do is click Custom, Install Windows Only. And here you'll see all of your different drive partitions. Because I've actually been tinkering with installs here, this drive here has unallocated space, but we don't have to worry about that. We have various partitions here, and you'll be prompted with some warnings as to which partitions you cannot install Windows to versus which one you can. So partitions 1 and 2 will give you an alert that they cannot be installed, not to worry. You'll need to find the partition containing your C drive, and it'll be pretty apparent by the total size and free space you have. In the events that you want to completely just wipe your system clean and you have backups for everything that you'd like to, you actually could delete or reformat parts of your partition, or your entire drive for that matter, and just completely wipe out the partitions starting from scratch. A clean slate might be what you're going for, but only do that if you've backed up all the files that you want to an external drive first, because you will not be able to get them back. So we're gonna click next here, and if you get this particular window, you're golden. If the partition you've chosen contains files from a previous Windows installation, these files and folders will be moved to a different folder named Windows.old. You'll be able to access Windows.old, but you won't be able to use your previous version of Windows. If you get this window, you are absolutely good to go, and all the files on your computer will still be safe. So in a very technical sense, you don't absolutely need to have a backup, but I still will argue, yes, you do need to have a backup, because the question is a matter of when, not if. So once you see this window, you're good to click OK. Then Windows will do its entire installation process here. This screen will take some time, so please be patient. And because I did the boot menu option, you can see that Windows 10 is automatically selected. You might see an option with two partitions as you saw there. Just leave it as is, stay on the first one, and most likely you should be fine. And you can see now that Windows is getting ready to properly set up for the first time. Okay, so now we have a prompt here for connecting to a network. Because, like I said before, when it comes to the Wi-Fi drivers, unfortunately, when it comes to the Acer laptops, they don't actually have Wi-Fi drivers baked into Windows out of the box, so I have no choice but to either connect to Ethernet, or in the bottom left here, which is what I recommend you select, is I don't have internet. All this crap you can safely ignore and continue with limited setup in the bottom left. Unfortunately, when it comes to logging into a Microsoft account right away, what Windows does is super insidious and inserts OneDrive in the file path. It is absolutely disgusting and should never be any particular user's file path, because who in their right mind wants their desktop shortcuts to be synced with OneDrive? There are so many files that get synced when you do that, and it's so annoying.
Mammals, we have ourselves a crime scene.
Telemetry constant. Copilot over core functions. File path containing.
Oh, no!
OneDrive.
No one asked for this ever. So what we'll want to do here is continue with limited setup, click down there. This process will take a few minutes, so just let it complete. All right, so now we're in the Windows desktop. We have this Microsoft Edge prompt, as well as a few notifications. If I go back to the notification center, we can see here that these pop up. Your administrator or organization has set your device's Windows diagnostic data setting to required. This is taken care of because we triggered that setting in Rufus. So it does find the right display drivers, but unfortunately it doesn't find the Wi-Fi drivers. And because we are not connected to the internet, what we're going to need to do now is install our Wi-Fi drivers first and foremost. So at this point in the process, you're actually good to eject your USB drive installing Windows, so we're just going to do that now. Now it's safe to remove the hardware. So let's get rid of this, and you can see that Windows is now properly installed. We can just plug in a different USB containing the Wi-Fi drivers, so let me do that right now. And once it is plugged in, you can see my drive is DDashBlue. If I click on it, given an option here, DDashBlue in the top right corner, we can configure storage settings, open folder to view files, or take no action. For this guide, I highly recommend taking no action because you're going to get a lot of annoying prompts otherwise. And then what we're going to be doing here is heading to Explorer. You can either search it up using the bar in the bottom left, or you can use the Start menu. So you can see here, Internet Explorer is actually installed alongside Edge and appears as an option, which I find quite hilarious. What you want to do is go to File Explorer, and you're brought to the menu here. So go to your USB drive. I actually have a dual boot drive folder already set up. This folder structure is just for me to find my Wi-Fi drivers. And then what you want to do is find either your install exe or your install script. Right click it, run as admin, or you can just double click the exe and it should prompt you to run as admin. Click yes, and then what it'll do is install the drivers. You'll want to head into the bottom right, and you can see here, I have all my Wi-Fi networks that I can choose from. My network actually has this Wi-Fi just got better notification down here, which is awesome. So if you have super good Wi-Fi, you'll get that notification there. So let's close this, close out the menu here, and let's continue on with the next part of the guide.
We're ready to dive into section 4, the main Windows setup. Here's where you're going to want to see the video for further instructions for this section. This is an entirely hands-on section, so just follow the video and the documentation. I got my capture card working once again, so we're ready to dive straight into our freshly made Windows install. So the very first thing you'll want to do after you connect to Wi-Fi is trigger all of your updates. So just go into the search bar and type in the word update and click check for updates. It'll take some time to open the first time. So just be patient with that. And we can see here there are a ton of updates to install and download. So just click install now and trigger these right away. These Windows updates will take a while, but it's only for a first time setup. And trust me, you will not have annoying updates after you have everything set up. It's just the very first time where you're going to have a lot to install. This is both in terms of your hardware configuration, as well as updating to the latest version of Windows 10. So you can see here everything is installing, and this confirms that this version of Windows is still supported for security updates. There is this Windows update here, 2026 July 7th. This actually installed and finished way faster than I thought it would be. Or Windows Update is blazing fast like this. I was not expecting it to be. You can just click restart now. This one is taking some time to install. It interestingly went to 100% and then back to 0 and is slowly climbing its way up. We're just going to minimize all this and begin installing important apps. First and foremost, we're going to actually be installing a package manager called Chocolatey. I provide information about this in the documentation, so just follow along. Section 4.2.1 specifically. Go to the Start menu and right-click it, then select Windows PowerShell as an admin. You'll get a security prompt for which you'll say yes, and here is where a lot of the magic is going to happen in terms of debloating our system and getting everything set up. Even before anything else, what I would highly recommend all users do is move your mouse cursor to the top left of the window, right-click, and then click Defaults. Here, you'll want to disable these two modes, Quick Edit Mode and Insert Mode. Select these two and then click OK. Then what you'll want to do is close PowerShell, right-click the Start menu again, select PowerShell as admin again, yes once again, and then what you'll see here, if we right-click and go to the properties of this specific window, you'll also want to disable Quick Edit and Insert Mode here. As we initiate multiple processes and just let them run, PowerShell does this really annoying thing where once you click outside of the window, the entire process freezes until you focus back on the window and press a key. Properties refers to the specific window you're on, and defaults refers to what will be launched by default, after a restart, I believe. And then once you do, all of the processes you actually start in PowerShell will finish with or without your input, guaranteed. So now going through the documentation, you'll find a list of commands to copy. You'll want to copy all of these lines. These are what are also in the documentation, so you're just going to right click and copy from your browser and not Notepad. Go back to PowerShell and then paste. You can do this very easily by just right clicking PowerShell, clicking paste, and then all of the commands will execute one by one. You'll get some execution apology changes prompts, and what you'll want to do for these is just select A for all of them. So A for this one, A for this one, or you can select yes and it should work just fine. So A or Y will be good here, and you'll see that Chocolatey will be installed. This package manager is amazing, and I would highly recommend getting in the practice of using package managers. It requires a little bit of terminal know-how, but trust me, once you wrap your head around it, installing and upgrading a lot of your Windows apps will be very seamless without any user input and will save you a ton of time, sparing you from annoying update prompts. When it comes to pasting, the final line doesn't actually execute, so I just put in Choco here. You can press enter, and then once it's installed, you can see please run choco --help or choco command for the help menu. That's just to confirm that it's fully installed properly. Don't worry about this NVIDIA control panel. This is just for NVIDIA GPUs. You can install the control panel from the Microsoft Store if you'd like. Then if we go back to either the documentation or in my case, the Notepad, we can see here we have Choco install and then a ton of different programs you can choose from. So we're going to be running this command and you're going to see exactly why I chose these 3 programs for the specific guide. So we're going to be copying the command here. I talk about this more in the documentation. We have Etcher for flashing USB drives as well as Rufus. And then the big one is Office 365 Pro Plus. Actually, before that, what I would recommend doing is installing a specific web browser of your choice. In my case, I'm going to install LibreWolf, but instead you can also install Firefox, a bunch of different web browsers you can install through this, and in this way, you actually don't need to touch Edge at all. I specifically put Office 365 Pro Plus at the end because installing Microsoft Office takes the absolute longest, so we're going to leave that till the end, and you're going to see just how quickly all the other programs install. So now we're going to finally copy paste this command into PowerShell. So let's go back here, right click if it will work. You might have to close and reopen PowerShell once again. So we're going to do that. So copy and then paste. Here we have this line. There we go. Press enter and then it's going to install each of these programs. So it's gonna just fetch everything that it needs to and then start installing the program. So Etcher installed super quickly, Rufus installed super quickly, LibreWolf is gonna take a little bit more time because it's a web browser. A few apps might auto start, like Balena Etcher here. We're going to worry about using that later. But in the meantime, because Balena Etcher actually starts up, we can just quickly go into settings and then off anonymously report errors. This is just to prevent a little bit of data that gets sent to Balena Etcher if you'd like, so I'm going to do that and then close the window here. LibreWolf is installing, or whatever web browser you'd like, and then through that we can actually go back to the desktop here. You can see Microsoft Edge sneakily peeking out of there, so let's show the desktop. Right click and then just completely delete the shortcut. You could uninstall Edge if you'd like. I personally choose not to because there might be some critical system process that hangs and then just freezes my entire system because it can't recognize Edge. It's just there as a fallback to prevent the system from freezing or crashing. Next up, you're going to see Office 365 Pro Plus is getting installed. LibreWolf is already installed, so we can check out the browser and the documentation now if we'd like to. So we'll just go to LibreWolf right here. We click it. It will launch. It'll take a bit more time. I think you have to actually click open on a first time startup. And we can see that the entire guide is here ready for us. So let's go to section 4.2, which is where we are. So this is the command that we already copied. Scrolling down, you can see that I added that section for a web browser and then provided descriptions for it. So scrolling down now into what I would consider the best next step is to install this third-party extension for Windows Explorer called Qt Tab Bar. So what you'll want to do is go to Qt Tab Bar here. You can ignore this HTTPS site alert because we're not actually sending any data to it. Never sign in to accounts of any kind if it's HTTP and not HTTPS. But because we're only downloading an app and not sending any data of our own, it should be fine for our purposes. So what you'll want to do here is download the second option. So we'll click this and then we're taken to a download prompt. We're going to put it straight in downloads. Extract it as you usually would for any zip file, and then you'll install it. So Qt tab bar here, click yes, and then go through the setup wizard, follow all the prompts. Qt tab bar version 2048 is being installed, so just let it do its thing, finish installing. It shouldn't take super long. There we go. And then if we launch Windows Explorer once again, to activate Qt tab bar, you go to View. You can go to pin it right here to make sure that it stays in view. I personally like having it there so I can just navigate from home to share to view, and you can see it already finished installing the Microsoft Office suite. Now you can go to options, and then if it's not enabled already, you can see it actually is on my end. Go down to options, this little down arrow, and then click Qt tab bar. And then what this does is it allows you to open up new tabs. So let's say we want to open up the desktop in a new tab, we would right click and then click open in new tab. So this is a phenomenal app to use on Windows 10 because Windows Explorer on Windows 10 does not have tabs. For the life of me, I don't know why. They added it for Windows 11, but didn't retroactively go back and add it to Windows 10. So this third-party extension is super useful for having a lot of tabs and navigating to whichever ones you'd like. You can even middle click with your mouse and just open up new tabs as well, just as you would in a browser. And so we're ready to move on. Going back to the documentation here, we're now in section 4.3, getting activated. So I'm not going to be verbally describing the process here. It's very straightforward. It's just following the instructions in this link for activating both Windows and Microsoft Office via PowerShell. Now is the point where we restart to apply updates. So let's just go down to the tray icon here. It's still installing, it's still hanging at 20%. Because the process is still hanging, you don't need to necessarily actually just update it right now. It's not super clear when updates are complete. So for the most part, when you click restart now, provided you've done all of the other steps, if it's still actually installing, if your internet connection is quite slow, you can safely click restart now. So just hang tight, let the updates complete, and we'll continue on with the guide. All right, we're finally here at the login screen once again, and this is where we're prompted to actually put in a password. Because in our initial Rufus install, we just created a user account straight away, we did not actually set a password, so we're going to be doing that now. What we'll see here is 3 boxes to input passwords into. Because we didn't set a password, we actually leave this top field completely blank, so we just create a new password straight away. Let's just do this, and then hit enter. Once you do, your password has been changed, click OK, and you're right back into the Windows desktop. We now go to section 4.5, debloat and tweak. This is an optional, but a highly recommended part of the guide, where we debloat and optimize our system to its absolute maximum potential. We have a few of these to go through, so let's get into it. First up, we're going to be restoring the Microsoft Store and installing an app called WinToys. Yes, you read that correctly. Yes, you heard me correctly. We are going to make the conscious decision to restore the Microsoft Store in full. There is an alternate guide you can use to install apps without the store, but it's more technical and a little beyond the scope of this guide, so I included a link in the documentation if you'd like to follow that. First up, we're going to be downloading this GitHub repository as a zip file, so let's just middle click it to open in a new tab. And you can see here there's an add-store.cmd file, which is a script that will run all of these installers, frameworks, runtimes, all of it. This is the one you'll want to download, so we'll click code here, then click download zip, and then we can put it straight in our downloads folder. We unzip as is, so just click extract. You can also double click it and it'll open up. It now does in a new tab and not a new window, which is really nice. This is why we installed Qt tab bar. Then we click add Microsoft Store -master. And then what you'll want to do is right click this add-store script and then run as administrator. You're going to get some security warnings because these are files downloaded from the internet. So we click run and then click yes. And then what this will do is completely restore the Microsoft Store to its mint condition on these particular versions of Windows. Don't worry about any of the red text here. That just means it's already installed. It just will install the packages that are missing. So specifically the store purchase app, the app installer, and the Xbox identity provider. Don't worry about this last one. It's these 2 that we absolutely need. So press any key to exit. And then once we go into the search bar here, we go to Microsoft Store. And then you'll get this alert saying, pardon the interruption. Before you can shop, we need to update the Microsoft Store. So just click update now, let it do its thing, and it'll restart.
While that's loading, take a look at how beautifully empty the start menu is, with absolutely nothing in your pinned start menu apart from Microsoft Edge, so let's get that crap out of here. And then if we click it again, there are absolutely no apps pinned beside it. You can pin some apps if you'd like to on the start menu and make it your own. It's literally just this list of apps. It's super small, super minimal, super deep loaded out of the box already. Compare that with the Microsoft Store. This is what we're aiming to avoid. Scrolling down, we have a bunch of stuff here in the Microsoft Store. Stinky Copilot app, must have free apps, get that crap out of here. The whole ethos, the whole point of doing this tutorial is to get away from all that crap and not have anything AI related injected into our system at all. So what we're going to do now is search the Microsoft Store, type in WinToys. You'll want to find the one that has a 6-pronged hexagonal gear, whatever you want to call it. And then you'll want to click Get. WinToys by this name here, Bogdan Petrosyan. That's just my attempt at pronouncing it. It'll go through the download and installation process just as you would for any app. Click Open, then click Yes, and now we're really ready to start optimizing our system. So here we just have a preview here where you can just click Take Control of Your System and skip the 6 dialog options. You can take a look at them, read through them if you'd like, and then we're brought to this menu. It's not overwhelming. There's a lot of information here at the start where you have your system, processor, graphics, memory, all that. You can also click this fire button here to run a benchmark on your performance. You get a rating from 0 to 10. So let's do that for fun. The most important one we're going to want to disable is search indexing and switch that off. We go back to WinToys here and we can navigate these menus. First, we have apps, a bunch of different apps installed. Here you can manage a lot of your apps, open, close, browse, search, reset, uninstall. You can do that for a bunch of the pre-installed software that you have. Computer manufacturers do sometimes install their own bloats, of which you can uninstall right here in one convenient place. Then we have services here. This is basically a much more up-to-date, polished version of this. This is more minimal, it's much more compact as well. You might still want to type in services in the event you want to disable certain services. Most users won't have to worry about this at all. I just wanted to share it. Then here, when it comes to performance, this is where we can really start tweaking our system to our liking. What you'll want to do is hover your mouse cursor over every single switch and see a description of what each do. We have first here Ultimate Performance Power Plan, which you can enable if you'd like. It actually is recommended to turn this setting on by the app itself. But because I'm on a laptop, I'm going to leave this disabled because I want a balance between performance and battery life, being able to switch to them at will. This is almost always a must switch on for desktop PCs by comparison. Next up, we have hardware accelerated GPU scheduling. We hover over this, recommended to turn the setting on. We have that on. We have virtualization, which is recommended to turn off. We have some startup apps, which we can configure. So if you click configure, we have a bunch of startup apps here that we can choose to have running or not. For example, here I have a Logitech mouse plugin, so there's a download assistant. This is what I mean about hardware manufacturers installing what could be useful, but is also at the same time, in a lot of cases, bloatware. Those are switched off. You can change that to your liking. Then we have relaunch apps here, recommended to turn it off. Background apps, recommended to turn this off, but it's on by default, so we can switch that off. Activity history, you can turn the setting off if you'd like, if you have a lot of activities that you don't want to keep track of. So we'll disable this for now here. In terms of visual settings, we can optimize visual effects for performance and disable transparency. So hovering over this, it's recommended to optimize visual effects for performance. I'm the type of guy who really wants as minimal animations as possible or entirely zero. If there are going to be animations, I hope they're fast. I don't like fade-ins. I don't like sliding effects that take too long. If they are there, they should be fast, or they should not be there at all, and have transparency disabled. The lack of transparency might save some battery life, but only really low-end configurations will benefit from it, so I just disable transparency myself. Then we have gaming settings. We have game mode here, which prevents driver updates, installations, stops notifications, lets you record some gaming sessions. Doesn't significantly increase the frame rate and may cause us freeze, drops, or crashes in certain games. Recommended to turn off, so I'm just going to do that. Keep background recording off, and then for super fetch here, you can just read this description here. I'm not going to go super in depth into every setting. I'm just going to take a look at the light bulb here. Recommended to turn setting off, so I will. Most of these you can follow what's recommended, but if you run into issues, you can go back here and switch some settings on. The golden setting we want to change here is search indexing.
Search indexing is essentially the Windows process of finding the organization structure of all your files and tries to make the Windows search option as great as it can be, which is still super poor relative to third-party alternatives. I talk about this more in the documentation here, where there are third-party alternatives like Everything and UltraSearch that you can use instead. Third-party applications to do searching of all of the files on your system are way better than Windows Explorer search will ever be, unfortunately, because it's not a priority of Microsoft's, wasting a bunch of processing power for a suboptimal search algorithm, which hogs up resources for no reason. Next up, we have delivery optimization. Turn that off. Network adapter on board processor, recommended to turn on, so we switch that on. Then we can continue on with health. We have fast startup here, recommended to turn the setting off, so we will as well. If you like hibernating your system, you can leave this on. I used to really like hibernation back in the Windows XP days. I don't really have a use for it anymore, but depending on your use case, you might want to have that on. Next up, cleanup, where we can go to storage here. We have temporary files, Windows updates, logs, error files. Because this is a fresh install, it's recommended to check everything and click delete. Once you do, you'll see that a bunch of files were deleted, saving you almost 7 gigabytes straight away. Then you can go to File Explorer here, quick access folders, jump list, recent items. You can clear these if you'd like. I'm not going to. We can go to the Microsoft Store, clear out the cache that might solve issues regarding installing, updating, or downloading apps. If you run into Microsoft Store issues for whatever reason, if you want to use it, for super specific programs, you can do so. I'm just going to click close because we recently installed it. Network here, I'm not going to go into these. You can just leave these as is. Then with the system restore, you can also delete all of your system restore points. It's really great to have system restores before you actually install certain driver updates. I recently had a situation where on my main desktop PC, after installing a certain version of AMD graphics drivers, it completely messed up the display of my entire system. I essentially did a fresh install to get rid of them, and I located the issue later on as those specific drivers themselves. So what I did instead is create a restore point before installing graphics drivers, and then roll back to that restore point, and it fixed the issue. But you can delete restore points if you'd like, if they're taking up too much of your system space. If I type in restore here, we have create a restore point. We can create our own restore point down here. You can search up videos for how to do this if you'd like, but it's not a super difficult process. Continuing on with WinToys, we have Storage Sense, recommended to turn on. Drive Optimization, recommended to turn on once again. You can generate a battery report if you'd like. You can also run repair commands, which I would absolutely recommend doing so. Just check these first two, DISM and FSFC. You can do that, then click repair. And while that's going, we can continue on. You can also run memory diagnostic, which requires a restart, so we're not going to be doing that here. We also have system updates, default security manually or disabled. Even though this version of Windows will not have any breaking updates, and so I leave the default, you can click security if you'd like. I'm just going to leave the defaults, and then if you hover over here, you can actually check for updates straight from this app. Next up, we have driver updates. Recommended to turn the setting on. App updates, recommended to turn off so you don't get annoying update prompts. We have co-installers here, which is recommended to turn off. Sleeping pill is grayed out, don't worry about that. You can also restart your graphics driver and icons cache if you'd like to. Finally, we go to tweaks, and then we see a bunch of different drop-down menus here. First, we go to desktop, and then you can see here, you can add different shortcuts to your desktop, like this BC. I like the recycle bin. I like the shortcut arrow here. We can add drop shadows for icon labels, which adds a little bit better contrast, a little easier to see. We have peek to preview. We have a title bar window shake. I will probably disable this. You can enable that if you'd like. And then you can change the wallpaper quality, which I will crank up all the way to 100. Next up, we have the start menu. With this web results when searching option, absolutely disable this because no person in their right mind would actually want web results in the search bar in the bottom left. Just to be absolutely safe, have this switched up. Auto install suggestions, so if we hover over the switch again, silently and repeatedly install suggested apps like Candy Crush, Solitaire, Netflix, Microsoft, get that off entirely. You definitely don't want that on. Next up, we have show suggestions, like Candy Crush, Netflix, more of that, more of the same, switch that off again. And showing hibernate in the power menu, if you go to health and enable hibernation, you will get that option once again. Next up, we have File Explorer. I definitely want to show file extensions, definitely want to show hidden and system items. Show files after extraction is complete. You can switch that on or off if you'd like to. There's a preview pane for files. I like to leave this off. I definitely want a shortcut to the recycle bin. You can also enable checkboxes for selecting items rather than hovering over items and shifting. It might need actually a full system restart, but it's the equivalent of enabling this option, item checkboxes, and then we can see here we can check specific items that we'd like to, just to select multiple in a more graphically friendly way. But if you like just using shift with your keyboard instead, you can do so as well. Sync provider notifications, I don't know what this is, so I will just leave this off. From reading this description, it seems to give off inshittified Microsoft vibes by giving suggestions, recommendations for a quote-unquote better experience. The whole point of this guide is to actually give you a better experience and not a Microsoft better experience, if you catch my drift. When opening Windows Explorer, you can also select which window you want to open by default. So let's choose this PC, we'll close Explorer again, open it, and it'll take you to this PC instead of quick access. I personally like going to this PC so I can see all my drives. Quick access is for those who want their most recent files at the ready. For the next drop-down menu here, we have privacy. These we entirely switch off without a second thought. Next up, ads. All of these are on, we switch all of these off. Going to system now. We have a clock with seconds, clipboard history, this I do want to enable, snipping with the print screen key, you can enable this if you'd like to. I personally use a third-party program. If you'd like to enable it, you can. I'm just going to leave it disabled myself. Mouse acceleration, if you don't like it, you can turn it off. I personally like it more than I dislike it, although this is subject to change. Numlock on by default, I do like having this setting enabled. Feedback notifications, occasionally displaying a notification asking you to rate or provide feedback about products or services. You can disable that if you find that annoying, which I personally do. You can also Alt-tab to include either your most recent tabs or all your tabs. This you'd want to leave the same. Digital Markets Act here. You can disable Microsoft Edge in this way if you'd like to. So if you're in the EU, I would recommend switching this setting on. Executing an SFC scan will turn the setting off. So just be sure if you go back into health and go to repair, if you run a scan, we can also view the logs here. This is actually super useful for first-time boot up because SFC scan found corrupt files and successfully repaired them. So this is really good for finding any files that could corrupt your system. It's not gonna give you a virus, but it's gonna have certain functionality stop working. This is good to run every time you do a Windows update to repair any of those corrupt files. But just so you know, once you do run them and then go back to Tweak's system, I believe is where it was, yes. This switch will be turned off if you run an additional scan. So now we go to super user, we have access to God mode. God mode just allows you to access all of the control panel shortcuts. If we go to the desktop here, you can see here we have this blank shortcut that we can click on, and this will take you to all of the Windows shortcuts that exist here. This is a super powerful tool for power users. Otherwise, it's not really something that you're gonna have to worry about. I personally like having this enabled. You can disable it if you'd like, and that shortcut simply disappears from the desktop. Then we also have developer mode. This is more so for advanced users. I actually leave this off. It's a little too much for my liking. Then we have user account control. I would leave this as the default. User choice protection driver. For that, I recommend leaving the default there as well. And finally, spotlight images here. Extract images that appear on your lock screen. You can click on this folder if you'd like to extract all of your lock screen wallpapers. If you really like Windows 10 wallpapers, you can do so. And that concludes, finally, everything with WinToys. That was a pretty lengthy subsection of this entire guide, but there are so many powerful tools here at your disposal. This app is so good for debloating your system alone that I felt compelled to show you all it. So now we're gonna go back to the guide here. We can close the other tabs now and continue on. 4.5.2 Windows Power Tool. This is a tool that will help us debloat our system even further. All we need to do is copy and paste this command in Windows PowerShell as an admin. So once again, go here and then paste. Press enter. And then what it's going to do is load a user interface, verifying power tool commands, and you're going to see that it opens a completely new window right here. So we'll just move these left and right. You can see here that the Windows PowerShell menu is on the left, and then the actual window is on the right. And as we interact with this program, it'll essentially execute commands in a terminal. This is mainly how computers work, except there is no terminal that you see, and all of the commands get executed behind the scenes when you interact with various buttons on graphical user interfaces. So first up, we have optimization here, optimizing Windows for performance by disabling a bunch of stuff we don't want. So let's click optimize here. It'll create a restore point very nicely for us, and then disable a bunch of the services here. Next up, we can set view services to manual, reducing the amount of startup processes here. This is really nice to just increase our performance that little bit more. And then we move on to the removal section. So here we remove all the bloatware. This will be lightning fast because there's absolutely no bloatware to speak of.
This is more useful for basic Windows 10 and Windows 11 installs, and you can apply this section of the guide to any general Windows setups you have as well. That's why this guide, in my mind, stands out, because parts of it can be useful even if the entire guide may not be necessarily useful. Next up, we're going to be removing OneDrive here, so just click Remove, click Yes. This will take a minute on regular installs, but it actually only took a few seconds to remove OneDrive. It's very important that we remove OneDrive at this point of the process and not before. Because we installed Microsoft Office from Chocolatey, it actually also installs OneDrive. So we want to remove OneDrive after the fact to make sure it's truly gone. Then we have the Microsoft Store. You can remove this if you so wish, but we literally reinstalled it manually using that install script from earlier in the guide. For our purposes, we're going to leave this alone. Unfortunately, you cannot use this reinstall because it assumes that you're using a regular Windows install and not the LTSC version. We took care of this already, so we're good to move on. Then we go to system settings. Enabling and disabling power throttling. These two options are dependent on whether you have a laptop or not, and enabling it is good for laptops. Power throttling should be enabled by default, but we'll just click it regardless to ensure it is. But if you really want to maximize performance, you can also disable it if you'd like. Here's where we can also enable dark mode, disable Cortana, and do quick animations. Cortana is essentially obsolete and discontinued, even on Windows 10, even in this install, I believe. I just clicked these three buttons just to be safe. Here, we can also enable Ultra Performance Mode, which this alone will improve most of the performance on Windows. Because I'm on a laptop, I'm not going to enable Ultra Power Mode, but this is absolutely an option you'll want to enable if you're on desktop PCs. Then we have some Action Center, Activity History, and Start Menu Web Search. I just ensure that Start Menu Web Search is disabled. It already is in PowerToys, but it doesn't hurt to click again. Next up, we have Set Timer Resolution, which will help gain a few FPS for games as it increases the processor update or refresh rate. So if you are an avid gamer and still want to play certain games on Windows, I would recommend selecting this option. You can also disable background apps. Network performance, I'll leave as is. I don't know what that does. And then also news and interest, you can also disable, although news and interest should be disabled already. Once again, it doesn't hurt to click. Then finally, we have Disk Cleanup and Reset Windows Update. You can run Disk Cleanup if you'd like. This will take some time to launch, so we'll just continue on in the meantime. We can create a system restore point graphically from this menu, although you can always just search up the word restore in the search bar, and you can also access that restore point if you so wish. Going to Disk Cleanup here, it'll find all of the previous Windows installations, update cleanup, all that good stuff that we actually have already done in WinToy. We're just going to close this out because we already did. Then we have some about information here. You can visit the GitHub if you'd like. But that concludes Windows Power Tool, so we'll close that, and it'll also close the window. With that, we've finished 4.5.2, and with that, we can move on to 4.5.3. Actually, I realized I can turn on reader mode for my documentation, so I'm going to do that now. Described as the ultimate Windows utility by Titus Tech, if you go to his YouTube channel, very prominent creator in the tech space, he created an extremely powerful Windows deep load utility tool that goes way beyond just simple deep loading. So once again, we're going to copy this command here. The instructions are provided right from the source from this ultimate Windows utility guide. You can follow this article, read more information about it. For now, we're just going to copy the command, open up PowerShell once more, and then access the utility. Press enter. You'll see it works if you have the CTT logo. Very nice ASCII art here. A brand new version has actually released recently with a lot more of a cleaner user interface. So we're going to move this window to the right and then have the guide be on the left to see what we're going to be focusing on. Specifically tweaks for this guide. There's a lot to explore. You can install various apps using either Winget or Chocolatey, your choice. You can click a bunch of programs to enable if you'd like to. There's a ton to choose from. We're still going. That's incredible. And you can easily search all these options as well. But for our purposes, we're going to be focusing specifically on the tweaks menu. Click on standard here, which will check all of the standard settings. You can further tweak these if you'd like, check and uncheck as you please. You can also go down to advanced tweaks, which you should run with caution. If you don't know what you're doing, leave all these unchecked. Then you're going to want to go to customize preferences and take a look here at some of the ones you'll want to enable or disable. I like numlock on startup. I do believe we enable that elsewhere, but it doesn't hurt to switch on again. Let's see here, scroll bars are always visible if you want. Disable start menu Bing search, start menu recommendations, disable that. Sticky keys, disable, system tray, disable, let's see what else here. Task view icon, window snapping. All these are worth looking at, switching as you'd like to. We also have performance plans here, which you can disable or enable as you please as before.
And once you're finally satisfied, go down to the bottom left and click Run Tweaks. And what this will do is run all the tweaks here, creating a system restore point. You can see here, once again, it's the model where you have a terminal window running commands, and then you have a user interface. You can see the green bar going up, runs disk cleanup as well. Will take some time, so we'll just speed along this process in editing. There we go, it took quite a lot longer than I thought it would. Do be patient in this process and trust that the operations are going to complete in the background. This is just to ensure you're doing a really thorough cleanup, and you can run any of the debloat steps from this particular section of the guide at any point in time if you'd like. But we click OK. We can check out these menus here. You can enable certain features here. In an actual install, I would probably enable Hyper-V. This is really good for virtual machines. It's really good for Docker, as well as Android emulators. I actually have Hyper-V installed already, so I'm not going to click install features, but if you do, it would just run all the processes in the terminal to install them. And as well, if you're interested in running Linux commands in Windows, you can run Windows Subsystem for Linux. You can just pause the video to read a description right here. We also have additional fixes here, legacy Windows panels to look at. All of these you can explore on your own time. Let's go to updates now. You can choose the update profile that applies to you from this specific utility if you'd like instead of WinToys. That choice is entirely in your hands. So now we're going to close out the window, and we'll see that we have a nice bye-bye message here, and we're back to the standard PowerShell menu. And that concludes section 4, with our system pretty much fully debloated now. Now we move on to section 5. Once again, this is a very hands-on section, so see the documentation for further instructions and continue watching. Now that we've successfully debloated the majority of Windows, we're good to restore backups. Now it's super important to be careful here. It is tempting to just copy the entire user folder or whatever folders you have back directly into your system. But if you're not careful and copy over too much, you might actually break some things. So what we're going to be doing here is showing you both the windows.old method and the method where we restore our files from our external drive. So first up, we're going to go to the File Explorer here, go straight to our C drive. We'll need to go to this PC and then go to our C drive. And then you'll see here, in addition to the Windows folder, we also have this newly created windows.old folder. Everything contained in the windows.old folder was taken from our previous Windows install. So whatever your previous Windows install was, if you did use the windows.old method, all of your program file folders should be here. If we go to users and D-U, we can see here the best example of this, we can go to the desktop here. This is essentially the folder structure we have had in our previous install. Going to desktop here, we can see this type of text file that I made here. I actually made it on the previous install, a test text file for restoring backups. I have .txt here twice, which is all fine and good. Also, if we go to the downloads folder, these are all the downloads from our previous install, some of which we did use in a previous section. So we have downloads, desktop, documents, all of the files that you have saved. The vast majority of them will be in your users folder. For more advanced users, you might want to restore some of your program files, some of the stuff in your Windows folder. But what we're going to do here is go to our DDashU folder, and then in a new tab, we're going to go to our user folder, which will need to go to this PC, C, users, DDashU, and then go to DDashU here, at windows.old versus at the C drive. It's very tempting to copy this folder and paste it right here, just overwriting the folder and then just merging all of the files into it. But this can actually break a few programs if you're not careful. It actually resulted in me not being able to download any additional Microsoft Store apps, no matter what I tried. So what you'll want to do instead is selectively copy specific folders. So we have desktop here, documents, downloads, let's see what else. If you have anything on music and pictures, you can do so, as well as videos. I don't have anything in my videos folder here, so what I'm going to be doing is simply copying over to the user folder on the C drive instead, and just pasting it in. So one more time, copy, and then paste right here. And then what this is going to do is copy over all the items in their specific locations right away. So it's copying over the ISO file and all the files that we've just shown. We also have just replacing the Qt tab bar. I'll just replace that. And then what we'll see here, if we go back to our desktop, we have the additional test.txt file here. And then if we go to, let's say, our downloads, just right here, we can see that we have merged all of the files we've had from our previous install with our current one. You can also rinse and repeat this process for the USB drive, so I'm gonna plug it in right now. It'll say D-black. Once again, desktop, documents, downloads from your external hard drive. For me, it's just a USB flash drive since it's so small. We can copy from the E drive and then go to specifically, you want to make sure your file path is correct, C users, your user folder, copy these 3, or whatever you'd like to copy over, and then click paste. 23 files with the same names. Because we copied over from windows.old, and this is the equivalent, you can just copy the files in the exact same way. One thing I forgot to mention in terms of how your Windows experience will look, after you apply all of the performance optimizations, you'll notice that the text is a little jagged, a little rigid, and not the cleanest. So to fix this, you can simply type in the word performance and find the option that says adjust the appearance and performance of Windows from the control panel. Simply click and you'll see a list of options you can choose from. You can adjust for best appearance, you can do best performance as well. These are just a lot of minor adjustments to make your experience better. What I like to do is click best performance and then check the following starting from the bottom up. First we have drop shadows for icon labels on the desktop, smooth edges of screen fonts, show window contents while dragging, show thumbnails instead of icons, and show shadows under the mouse pointer. I click apply, then OK. We have now much smoother text with drop shadows on the desktop, as well as your mouse cursor. You can adjust all those settings as you'd like. At this point, you should be completely satisfied with your entire Windows experience. If that's all you want to do and not install Linux at all, you can actually click off the video right here. Otherwise, we shift to section 6, preparing to install Linux. Do see section 6.1 in the documentation for how to create a partition via the disk management software. Here's where you're gonna also need the documentation. I'm gonna actually switch directly back to the desktop because what we're gonna need to do to install Linux on the same drive is to create a partition. I love making my partitions on the Windows side with the disk management software. What you'll need to do is right-click the start menu once again and click disk management right here. Once you do, just wait for the disk management software to finish loading. It might take a little more time if you have more drives. You can see that I have my blue and black drives plugged in as well. Don't worry about those. What you'll want to focus on here is your C drive. This is the partition of your main drive containing your Windows install. From an earlier section in this guide, you might recall that I actually had some unallocated space. So I'm going to quickly cut ahead to having the entirety be the C drive. When you load up disk management, you should see almost the entirety of your storage dedicated to a C drive. In my case, because I've been doing a lot of testing and completely nuked my system beforehand, all we have here is the C drive as well as a healthy EFI system partition. Don't worry about this for now, we'll come back to this later. You might have additional partitions after your C drive as well, which you can just leave as is. All you want to focus on is this one. So what we'll need to do to create a partition is to right-click the C drive partition and click Shrink Volume. Once you do, just give it some time to query the volume for available shrink space, which will be dependent on how much space is actually on your C drive after you copy over a lot of your files. If I drag this over here, you'll see that you cannot actually reduce this C drive beyond the specified amount here. I actually have close to 500 gigabytes, and because this is a fresh install, I can actually reduce the amount really significantly to over 400 gigabytes, leaving only a little less than 90 gigabytes for my Windows install. You can enter whatever number you'd like in megabytes. If you primarily want to use Linux and primarily will be storing all of your files on Linux, you can make the number way bigger. You can even do the maximum amount, but I would only do that in cases where you rarely have to boot into Windows and you just need it for 1 or 2 specific non-demanding software. Even if you use it for primarily just video editing, I would still give it more space than that. I'm talking about very hyper-specific use cases where Windows software is absolutely required every once in a blue moon. For me, a nice in-between, for example, could be, let's say, 240 gigabytes, which would pretty much split my drive in half. This is what I'm going to do. I would recommend changing the number as you see fit. So I'm just going to click shrink here, and what this will do is split the partition right down the middle. Even if it doesn't do it visually, pretty much did it here. You'll see that we have around 240 gigabytes on the C drive, and now we have close to 240 gigabytes of unallocated space. Now that we have this space, I'm going to show you how we'll be installing Linux to this space later on. Heading back over to the presentation now, we're ready to advance. I'm going to be describing what choosing a Linux distro is all about. But first, it's time to define some terminology. Distros is shorthand for distributions, and distributions are essentially variations, configurations, or quote-unquote flavors of Linux, which are tailored to different types of users and use cases. There is a whole variety to choose from, and there is no just installing Linux in a very technical sense, because Linux can mean a bunch of different things. Linux at its core is the kernel, which is essentially the software that interacts directly with your hardware, and is the baseline for all the software configurations, libraries, utilities, you name it. It is all built on top of that kernel. When it comes to choosing a distro, there is a lot of analysis paralysis at play. We can begin with the process of elimination.
Because up here we have this incredibly long image of a ton of different distros to choose from. You can see that there's various tree structures here, super wide trees as well, because there's just that many. One big tree here, another big tree here that also spawns into a smaller tree, and then a massive tree here, but it's also connected to this massive tree here, and then we have a lot of smaller independent trees. That is a lot of distros to choose from, and this is pretty much how a lot of newbies to Linux think in terms of choosing a distro, and they get overwhelmed immediately. Fortunately for us, some distros are actually not dual boot friendly on the same drive. This whittles our options down significantly while still maintaining a healthy variety from all of the major distro families. Just to give a very surface level, just off the top of my head analysis of each of these distro families, we have 4 here. And I ordered them in this way in terms of how they operate. These are the big distro families to keep in mind, and right off the bat, if you're completely new to Linux, completely remove Arch-based distros from the equation entirely. The only reason you would want to use Arch is if you want to be an advanced user, if you want to learn how Linux works, if you want to really learn about computers, only for the biggest tech enthusiasts, the power users, the ones who enjoy maintaining their systems. There's a lot of configuration, a lot of setup, a lot of great documentation out there, but it's a lot more involved. And by almost design definition, I want to say, a lot does not work out of the box because it's a very small box by choice. Now that we have that out of the way, moving left to right, we have Debian first and foremost. This is the one that's the most stable and changes day to day the least. The design philosophy of Debian is really great for servers, but you can absolutely use it on desktop as well. That said, I do think Debian lacks a bit on the software front, and it's overall the most conservative, not in a political sense, but in terms of actually adding new software. You're likely going to deal with a lot of older versions of software. You can modify the experience to use newer software, but that modification adds a little bit of extra steps. New versions of Debian are released every 2 years or so, I believe, so you're not going to really get new feature or version updates all that often. Next up is Ubuntu. Ubuntu is actually based on Debian, but has made a lot of modifications to the point where they can be considered their own branch of distro families. Ubuntu is actually a company-backed family of distributions, and this company's name is Canonical. They have taken Debian and quite modernized it, allowing for a lot more expansive software variety out of the box, and there's a lot of offshoots of Ubuntu that are really great for new users. Ubuntu is absolutely viewed as the grand perception of Linux overall. When people hear of Linux and try using it for the first time, a lot of Linux that I've seen over the years from a very outsider's perspective has been based Ubuntu. At the same time, I would say that Ubuntu being backed by a company is making company-based decisions that are kind of starting to lock users into its ecosystem. I wouldn't necessarily recommend base Ubuntu, but because of the open source nature of the operating system at the same time, there are a lot of offshoots of Ubuntu that I absolutely still recommend. A lot of Ubuntu-based distros are exceptional. Also, when it comes to software compatibility, documentation, and guides, a lot of what you'll find on the internet is geared towards Ubuntu. It is by far the most popular of all the distro families in my view, and is definitely super high up there in terms of being beginner-friendly. So on that front, all you need to know about both Debian and Ubuntu, they're pretty closely related, a lot of the same scripts installation. If it works with Debian, it'll likely work with Ubuntu, and even vice versa a decent amount as well. Finally, the one that I haven't mentioned yet is Fedora. Fedora is kind of the middle of the road between Ubuntu and Arch. A more accurate description would be to group all of these in terms of user friendliness, and then Arch is placed way farther to the right. So Fedora is absolutely still a great user-friendly choice, and it's especially great for those who prefer to have a bit more modern hardware. The design philosophy of Fedora differs from Ubuntu and Debian. I mentioned that Debian has a big release version every 2 years. Same as Ubuntu, Fedora's is about every 6 months. So you get more of the recent up-to-date software. The term is essentially the cutting edge, whereas Arch is bleeding edge software where you get all of the latest software immediately, to the point where it can break your system. Fedora is the nice middle ground, where you get as close to the latest as possible, while also still being quite stable. There is a vast variety of software that is available for it, especially when it comes to having the most modern, up-to-date versions. That said, on the documentation front, I'm thinking of specific drivers. I guess I could talk about my own situation where, with my specific hardware configuration, I was able to find drivers for a specific external display only in Ubuntu and Debian, because the documentation is geared towards those two. I don't actually know how driver-friendly Fedora is, So if you have any specific niche peripherals, the documentation there might be lacking. This is in my experience. Don't take that as absolute fact, and don't take it with so much weight either, because a lot of software and hardware compatibilities really do work quite well out of the box for all of them. It's just as you go from left to right, the absolute newest of the newest hardware is more supported right away. For example, if there's a shiny new graphics card that comes out, it will be compatible with Arch first, Fedora second, Ubuntu probably third, and Debian probably fourth. That said, those shiny new graphics cards are very much for richer folks, those who do it as part of their job, who love to tinker, all that, and it's not geared for most users. For the most part, Fedora should work just fine, and a lot of the Fedora-based distros really are geared for various multimedia users. Those who are gamers, those who are creatives, although of course creative tools still absolutely work super well for Ubuntu and Debian, but Fedora just has that spin of being a little more up-to-date, closer to recent, while still being quite stable. You can't really go wrong with any of these three, and only choose Arch if you are a super in-depth enthusiast learning about computers, and for some reason you want to dual boot an Arch-based distro with Windows. I assume you're quite the expert if you already are comfortable or enthusiastic with Arch and are willing to learn, but for just getting set up and running and start actually using your computer for your daily tasks, definitely go with one of these three and stay away from Arch, I would say. None of these families are bad per se, it's just geared for a different audience that mainly falls outside the audience of this guide. Next up, we have a ton of dual boot friendly distros available to us. I specifically took the time to test out a bunch of them based on different distro families. So you can see here, I categorized them based on the type of family. I found 2 for Arch, 3 for Debian, 5 for Fedora, and 5 for Ubuntu. You can see that with the number of Ubuntu entries matching the amount of Fedora ones, you can subtly tell that I'm recommending Ubuntu or Fedora a little over Debian. That said, Debian is not bad at all. It's just in my experience testing out Debian and seeing what I can do, there's a lot more you need to configure with Debian, and the software variety is kind of lacking. So we have a bunch of different distros here, like EndeavourOS and Manjaro for Arch. We have basic Debian for Debian. In addition to the distro families, there is just the distro itself. We have a meme distro here, Hannah Montana Linux V26, also based on Debian, which is literally just Debian with the Hannah Montana reskin. I just wanted to include this here for the memes, and I also wanted to shout out an individual by the name of Noah Kaggle, who actually revitalized this meme distro and brought it into the modern age. If you want a glamorous best of both worlds distro, that's your hot ticket. But moving on, we have one of my favorite distros, Q4OS. For the most part, it has all of the software that you need, and it is, in my opinion, by far the best Debian distro to use for that reason. Another reason is that the setup is super friendly for getting everything you need, as well as NVIDIA graphics card support right out of the box. Next up, we have a bunch of different Fedora-based distros here. I'm not going to go over all of these. What I will say is Bazzite is quite the popular gaming distro, and it's also an atomic one. From my understanding, atomic distros are those where you cannot modify a lot of your system, which is really great if you simply want to boot up Linux to play games and livestream. If that's right up your alley, where you really just want a gaming workstation, but you do want still a traditional desktop to navigate everything, Bazzite is definitely one of the distros for you. Then we have base Fedora, then we also have a distro called Novara. This distro is the ultimate media workstation. Imagine taking Bazzite, but then making it more of a traditional distro design where you can modify parts of your system as you'd like, and then throw on a bunch of creative tools on top of it. I'm talking Blender, I'm talking Kdenlive, it's a video editor. Even with DaVinci Resolve, the best way to install DaVinci Resolve right out of the box, supported by Novara itself, as a part of its setup process, makes this an excellent choice for multimedia powerhouse users in those regards. And finally, a shout out to a smaller distro called Ultramarine Linux, which is a lot more minimal, a lot more low-key, and it's one of those situations where it's a boring distro, but boring equals good. Their values are also quite progressive, which aligns with my values, and they have by far the best wallpapers I've ever seen out of any Linux distro. In fact, I used it as a background for this video's thumbnail. And then finally, we have the Ubuntu-based distros. These are the ones that get massive mainstream appeal and massive mainstream recommendations. First up, we have the absolute classic that is Linux Mint. This is the absolute definition of boring in all the best ways, low-key, friendly, all those labels you want to call it. It just works out of the box, and you can get set up super easily with it. So thankfully, Linux Mint, based on Ubuntu, is absolutely an easy contender. And I know this because that's the first one I've successfully dual booted and used for a few months, until I found something better for my use cases. Linux Mint is an absolutely phenomenal first choice, and I imagine it always will be, because they really make design decisions that go away from the Ubuntu corporate backing. So even if Ubuntu goes down the enshittification rabbit hole, there will be other distro providers that care for the users and pull them out of it. We also have Lubuntu, which is just a lightweight form of Ubuntu. Not gonna go in depth with this one. It's just a distro that's really good for older machines, similar to Q4OS actually, and my personal daily driver, QuarkOS. This distro is the sister project to Q4OS, made by the same developers. Where Q4OS is based on Debian, QuarkOS is based on Ubuntu. This is a distro that most people have not heard of, and I could do an entire video in and of itself, but QuarkOS essentially provides all of the utilities, the design philosophy of it, all of the extra tools that it provides. The software support is incredible, and I find it helps pull out and remove all of the enshittification that I believe Ubuntu is planning on adding in the most. Therefore, it's currently my absolute favorite distro and the one I recommend. It's also one that is super underrated and super not heard of. Q4OS is a little more popular than QuarkOS because QuarkOS is one that I only know of through Q4OS. And I did daily drive this for a bit, but QuarkOS I just found to be better for my use case. We also have base Ubuntu and a super popular pick called ZorinOS. ZorinOS really shines in terms of its sleekness, its polishedness. If you want something that is super modern with a minimalist design in terms of how the interface looks, this is definitely a popular choice, and it definitely has been making headlines, so feel free to choose it if that's up your alley. There is another chart that I also made for non-dual boot friendly distros, but I'm actually not going to describe it in depth in the video, nor am I going to show a table, because the information in that table is more subject to change. I don't want to commit to a static table in terms of ones that are non-dual boot friendly, because if there's a future update that makes the process easier, I'm going to add it to this list in the documentation. This is not a complete list. There are so many others, I imagine, which are also dual boot friendly that I simply cannot cover in this video. I just wanted to find quite the healthy variety here. All that said, just know that there are distros which are absolutely not dual boot friendly, and I would discourage users from trying. It's not impossible to dual boot, but I do have to make the list digestible somehow. If it's not the absolute easiest to dual boot, it does not go on this list. It has to be done graphically and be super apparent to users right out of the gate. And of course, forget about all the heated discussions over which distro is the best. The objectively correct answer is Hannah Montana Linux. Once again, check out Noah Kagel's video on it. It is so entertaining to watch. It really does teach you a lot about the design philosophy, about the things you can do to modify Linux and really make it your own. Here we have a nice taskbar down here with all of the Hannah Montana icons. We also have a very nice pretty pink theme here. We have a cutout of Hannah Montana, which I believe is just ripped straight from the older version of it, as well as the Hannah Montana logo. You can see little edges pointing out. Definitely go check out his video. It is such a blast to watch. This is the objectively best distro to install. You don't need to even think about any of the others. Forget I said anything. This is the one to go with. End of the video right here. In all seriousness, do your own research. Check the documentation. Click the links that I provided in them. I have this table. I have links to all the distros. You can choose whichever one suits your needs best from what I described. My recommendation one more time is QuarkOS. This is my daily driver. Other ones that I also recommend are Linux Mint, Ultramarine Linux, Nobara, and if you want to go with something Debian based, I would go with Q4OS. The second and only other major choice you'll have to make when it comes to choosing your distro is also choosing your desktop environment. These are most easily thought of as a user interface or what you visually interact with. There are many to choose from, but it's not nearly as overwhelming compared to distros, with that entire multi-branch Linux family distro tree. We'll keep things simple and recommend you go with one of the following to start. So first up we have KDE Plasma here, which is a very customizable Windows-like experience, with a ton of useful apps and utilities out of the box. Linux has incredible software variety, but when it comes to other desktop environments, not a whole lot is included out of the box, and you'll have to install a lot of apps manually. Not necessarily the case for KDE Plasma. There is a lot that is provided to you straight away. I would argue that this environment is excellent for power users, but at the same time, its defaults are equally very welcoming to beginners too. It's very versatile in that way, where it's both beginner friendly and is super powerful for power users, which I would say I am, to a certain degree at least. Therefore, it is my desktop environment of choice, and it'll get better long term too. The developers at KDE recently got a lot of investments, a lot of donations. I'm not sure what exactly to call it from the headlines and videos that I've seen. They essentially got a whole lot of money to make KDE Plasma that much better. So regarding a long-term investment, KDE Plasma is absolutely your best bet.
Next up, there's GNOME, pronounced with saying the actual sound of the G followed by gnome. GNOME. This one is more of a Mac-like experience, and it's much simpler to use out of the box. It does require a lot of extensions for enhanced functionality, and it's not one that I particularly know all that much about. I think in the very beginning, when I was installing base Ubuntu, because GNOME is the default desktop environment, I didn't really like what Linux had to offer me. Granted, that is a very small view that doesn't take into account the entire picture. It's just, since Ubuntu is considered the flagship most well-known distro, Fedora is catching up on that, but even then, GNOME is still very much the absolute core desktop environment, and it's the second most popular right now, behind KDE. In short, I don't particularly like this desktop environment because it's so different, in a way that I kinda don't like. I prefer using Windows over Mac. I can use Mac if I'd like to, but it is really changing the entirety of your workflow, and you have to learn a whole different configuration. Finally, we have Cinnamon, which is quite the simplified Windows-like experience as opposed to KDE Plasma, which is super powerful in its customizations. Cinnamon is the most welcoming for beginners by far, because of that simplified experience. There's not a lot to tweak, not a lot to modify, and users won't be customizing things all that much. It can be limited in its functionality, which might be by design and its strength, as it really is best for those who don't like being overwhelmed with options. This is actually the default of Linux Mint. I personally like KDE Plasma over Cinnamon, so while I did dual boot Windows and Linux Mint for a few months at a time, including installing Linux Mint on my MacBook and bringing that to university classes, while I do like the Cinnamon desktop environment and really do recommend Linux Mint, it's just not particularly what I like the most, and I found something better. That said, if you want a super bare bones, basic, traditional, boring, but super solid, unchanging Linux experience, Linux Mint is by far your best bet, combined with Cinnamon, as I believe it's developed by the same team. Now I'll quickly show you what each of the desktop environments look like, starting with KDE Plasma. Here we can see that there's a lot of features, a lot of customization. This is the equivalent of the task manager. These are the system settings. We can see there's a ton of options in this side menu here. Everything is laid out very nicely. There's just a lot of options, but it's super organized and not necessarily overwhelming. The more you click around, the more you might get overwhelmed with a ton of settings that you can change, but it really is great for those power users. And you don't really have to modify that much from the defaults as well. This is a very stock KDE Plasma experience, and you can't go wrong with it. We also have a lot of different widgets here. For example, a sticky notes app, a weather widget, a stopwatch widget, and a CPU use widget, which is essentially taking a panel from the system monitor, which is the equivalent, once again, to Task Manager, and having just this be on the desktop at all times. Then in the bottom left, we have the equivalent of the Start menu, where you can access all of your different applications. Also the place where you do your power operations, just like Windows. As well as most of the things you'd find in the bottom right corner of the system tray. You have a built-in clipboard manager, sound, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, showing just the desktop and the time, as well as I believe this is a button for configuring different widgets. I could be wrong about this last one, but you can mix and match a bunch of different pieces of KDE Plasma configured to your liking. You can change the entirety of the taskbar, move it wherever you'd want, insert whatever you want wherever you want it. It provides a lot of granular control in that way, while still being super friendly to new users, if you don't want to touch any of that. One final time, this desktop environment, KDE Plasma, is the one I recommend the most. Up next, we have GNOME. This is a lot more of a simpler desktop environment with a lot more rounded corners here, just off the design, rounded folders, rounded menus here. This is a very Mac-like experience with just a very thin bar at the top, where you can toggle different options by clicking on the separate menu buttons here. So here we have internet connection, dark theme, power mode, and do not disturb. We also have a super simplified video player, document viewer. It's as bare bones as you can get out of the box, which could be beneficial for you if you want a Cinnamon-like experience in that way, in terms of that design philosophy, while also being more Mac-like instead of Windows. Finally, we have Cinnamon. So we have system settings in the top right. It's a very clean list here. This is actually on an Arch-based distro. I believe it might just be standard Arch. And this really exemplifies the power of choosing a distro and also choosing a desktop environment. Some distros just have a specific desktop environment on its own, sometimes by default, but there's other options, or they might all be equally valued. A lot of distros do have Cinnamon as a desktop environment you can download, beyond just Linux Mint. Although Cinnamon is definitely not the most popular desktop environment, so you have to do a little bit of research to do that. You can install desktop environments later on, if you don't like your current one, without reinstalling an entire distro, but that's beyond the scope of this guide. I really like just choosing a desktop environment alongside a distro and downloading a specific ISO file straight out of the gate. Some distros also allow you to choose your desktop environment at install time, which is also equally as good.
because there you're still choosing your out-of-the-box experience. Anyways, continuing on with Cinnamon, we have a very base file manager, which is very traditional. You can change the views, you can access the file path here, as well as all your options in the left sidebar. Very reminiscent of the older days of Windows, especially in the start menu down here, where we have all of your applications and then application categories, as well as all of them listed right beside. Then we have our power operations down here, and a few favorite applications you can pin as well. Definitely a lot more of a minimal, but also quite good-looking desktop environment that is super welcoming to new users and definitely the least overwhelming to new users in my opinion. And that's all there is for Section 6. Now that we've made it to Section 7, we're finally ready to download and install Linux at long last. Once again, this entire section is a video demo, so it's recommended to have your Section 7 documentation ready. Of course, you can always just follow along with the video if you prefer, but I provide more detail in there that you can read, which the video may not provide for you. It's all dependent on your learning style. So hopping back over to our laptop screen once again, we have Section 7. Let's head over to 7.1, flashing your USB and rebooting. At this point, we assume that you've found your Linux distro of choice and are ready to download the ISO file for it. So let's do that now. As mentioned before, my favorite distro is Quark OS, so this is the one we're going to be installing. The easiest way I can think of describing Quark OS is if Kubuntu and Lubuntu had a baby. Kubuntu essentially is Ubuntu with the KDE desktop environment, and Lubuntu stands for Lightweight Ubuntu. Imagine both of these had a beautiful love child with all of that corporate bloat stripped back as much as possible with additional useful utilities on top of it. For that reason, Quark OS is currently my favorite operating system. So I would click the download button right here, and once I do, I'm prompted to download the ISO. This version is actually newer. You can see that there's R2 right here, and the version I have is R1. Not significantly different for our purposes. All this means is that it's a slightly older ISO, and you have to spend a little more time upgrading a few things. So we're good to close this window now, and move on to actually flashing our ISO. So we're gonna use Balena Etcher instead to flash our USB drive using the interface below. So all we need to do is type in Balena Etcher, so just start typing it in and it should appear in the start menu. We click this, we launch the interface, and we have a prompt here saying that Etcher collects a limited amount of anonymous data to improve user experience, which we can opt out of in the settings. If you're really concerned about that, you can click the gear in the top right corner and just trigger this slider to shift to the left. It is to the right by default, but I already changed it. Anonymously report errors to balena.io. We can just remove that, click OK. All you need to do is first click Flash from File, then go to wherever your downloaded ISO file is. So click Downloads here, we'll click this Quark OS ISO here. Any Linux ISO you have, you essentially click it and click Open. Then you want to ensure that you have the correct USB drive selected. So I currently have two right here, one that's my 64 gig USB drive, and one that's actually 8 gigs. Because this is a checkbox, you definitely want to ensure you only have one selected. The way this drive is partitioned, sometimes it'll take up multiple drive letters. Don't worry if the operating system doesn't recognize an already flashed USB drive, you can easily reformat and reflash it with what I described already in this guide. So we're going to select our 8GB USB. Because our Quark OS ISO is only 2GB, it will fit on here nicely. There are some ISO files that could actually be above 8GB, but for our purposes here, this 8GB USB drive will suffice us just nicely. We select one, and then we click Flash. Once we do, click yes, and the process begins. So we'll see that the slider is going to start really soon. It's going to take some time, and you'll see what the write speeds are. It's been close to a minute now, and you can see that the process is working really nicely. Everything is just flashing accordingly. You're seeing continuous progress, and you're not seeing random loading screen freezes. So that's how you know it is working. Alright, so it's been a few minutes. We can see that the purple bar is almost at the top. And once the flashing process is complete, it'll switch over to the validating process, which is much faster. So this will not take long. When it comes to how long this process will take specifically, it depends on the age of your USB drive. My 8GB USB drive is quite old, so it is quite slow. That's just a matter of write speeds. But if you have a modern USB drive, it'll be much quicker, rest assured. Alright, now that our ISO is pretty much fully flashed, you should get this pop-up saying you need to format the disk in drive D before you can use it. Don't worry about this format disk pop-up, make sure to always click cancel. This just successfully means we flashed our USB drive. It's done in a way that Windows cannot recognize, but that's actually a good thing for us because that means it's formatted specifically such that it's bootable. So just click cancel here, not to worry. We can go to our folder here, we can see this is our USB drive, the D drive, and with that, we are finally ready to reboot and install. Close anything that you're doing, and also eject everything except your USB drive that you're going to be booting from. So I've done that now, and what you'll want to do now is boot directly into your boot menu or BIOS/UEFI settings once again. I'm going to restart, and instead of doing the shift restart method, now I'll do the button mash method. Alright, so once again, recording on my phone, you want to click restart, and then be prepared to mash your boot menu button. So for me, it's F12. If you don't know your key, you can look it up in the documentation I provided, but you'll see once I continuously mash F12, eventually we'll see the boot menu screen. So let's just do this here, mash, 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 and here we go. This is probably the clearest I'm going to get on my phone camera. You can see that there are two options to choose from. We have an option called Linpus Lite, and then we also have the Windows Boot Manager. This will be different depending on how exactly you formatted your USB drive, which program you use perhaps, as well as the ISO. So anything that says Linpus, anything that remotely gives off any name like a USB drive, there's a bunch of different names for these. This is the current boot priority order, so we'll see that if we were to boot up regularly, because it's at the top, it would boot into the USB drive automatically. But of course, you could have gone into your BIOS/UEFI settings and changed the boot order instead. Of course, since we're booting into this one time, irrespective of the order, you want to make sure that Linpus Lite or whatever your USB drive name is, you'll want to make sure that's selected. In my case, it's white, and then hit enter. And then we're brought to a few options. So this is going to be a quick startup option for you. Each Linux operating system will have some variation of a boot menu here. So at the top, we'll have your try or install option. This is the one you'll want to use for most cases. If for some reason, graphics-wise, it doesn't work, you can head to the desktop here where it says Save Graphics. This will vary, and you will probably have a few more options depending on which distro you choose. A lot of them have a different menu screen. If I were to zoom out, you can just see the general layout of this screen. It's very minimal. It's designed for you to essentially select an option with your keyboard and press enter, or the right key. So we're going to zoom in one more time, and we'll choose the option Try or Install. Most of the distros you choose will have a variation of this, so you'll just want to go to this one and hit enter right now. Depending on the loading process, you'll see either a bunch of text in the terminal. Don't worry if anything fails. Usually it's not an issue if it does. Right now, it's just going through all of the boot menu options. Here we can see as text changes, it becomes pretty difficult to see for my camera to focus. There's just a bunch of text flying through the screen. It doesn't really matter what's there anyway. Once we get a stable picture, the camera lens will stabilize, but you can see this is a variation that just has a bunch of commands flying through the terminal. It will eventually boot into the desktop. Other distros might have a more graphical process, look more elegant and polished. Regardless, the wait times are pretty similar. Just be patient and allow the process to complete. There we go. Now we see our mouse cursor here, and we have a few options. All right, now we have a stable screen here. Because I have a capture card, I have these additional options, so don't worry about this. I actually didn't click anything, it just transferred to a new menu here. It has a Wi-Fi card detected. There is this Wi-Fi connection screen. I'm actually going to connect to Wi-Fi a bit later, so I'll click cancel. You don't even need to connect right now. You can do it through the KDE interface instead. But it's really cool how the Q4OS team has created various windows to start off with to really help users get set up right away, connecting to Wi-Fi before anything else. But we'll just skip that for this part of the guide. There we go. We can select our language, English, American, and then you can see we have the KDE desktop environment logo. So once the desktop boots up, you can see now the picture is a lot more clearer, thankfully, because it's not just black and white. Unfortunately, it's just the time of day I'm recording this. And you can see that we have a bunch of different options to choose from. Because I'm using a capture card, there actually is an external display. It is identifying one just to the right of my display. Not to worry about that. You will see this on boot up, not to worry. Welcome to QuarkOS. Pay no mind to the grammatical errors there. This is just what happens when developers of different languages try to translate things over. Regardless, don't let that knock QuarkOS's credibility. It is an amazing operating system. This dialog, we're going to be taking a look at it a bit later. What you'll want to direct your attention to is actually in the top left. Install QuarkOS. So most distros will have an option to actually install the operating system. What we're in right now is the live environment. You can essentially think of the live environment as a playground, for you to actually play around with the operating system safely, without touching anything that's on your drive at all, until you install. So what we're going to do here is go straight to installing QuarkOS. If you do want to play around before we do, you can come down here to Wi-Fi and connect to Wi-Fi. Then you can play around with a web browser here that's installed. If we go to the application menu here, we can see that the KDE desktop environment
has a very nice tiling system here, and then a bunch of different application categories for you to explore. You can play around with all of these apps. There's a decent amount of them here, like system settings, for example. If we load that, and then we move the window around, very nice genie wobbling effect. You can definitely turn these animations off, not to worry, but let's switch to dark mode for now, actually, and then click apply. We have some animation speeds. We can move it to instant. We can keep it the same. A lot of different options with the interface. This is really the best way to test out if you like the desktop environment. Definitely do that in this live area before you actually install your operating system, just to see if you get a feel for the desktop environment. Maybe you like it, but want to try installing something else, or maybe you don't like the desktop environment entirely and you want to switch before even installing anything. So what we'll do now is go to CorkOS up here and begin the installation process. It'll say, welcome to the CorkOS Resolute installer. It actually is beneficial to connect to the internet at install time if you'd like to. Not absolutely required, but you can do it. So we'll click next and follow the instructions. Keep the US English keyboard the default. You can change your keyboard layout if you'd like to. We'll click next. You can actually determine what actually gets installed on your system right away. You can have the full desktop experience here, which is recommended for regular users, and this is the one we'll be going with. A full-featured desktop with a web browser, Office Suite, and the recommended application set. Other ones here include Basic, Live, and Pure. I may get into these in a future video, but all you need to know is that they are much more minimal, stripped-down versions of the operating system if you want to set more up from scratch. So we'll click next, and this is the critical key part. I did a lot of testing when it comes to how different operating systems handle partitionings. This menu is exactly what we want. From earlier, when we actually created our partitions, we can finally see them here, ready to install, indicating that we've done everything correctly. We can click install alongside, so the installer will shrink a partition. Even if we didn't go into disk management, we could actually shrink the Windows partition and give CorkOS as much size as we'd like to. For example, we could click and then drag this and just leave that entire partition as is. So we have a minimum amount of storage we can give it and a maximum amount of storage we can give it. It's not necessary to do what we did in disk management for all distros, but to be absolutely safe, I would recommend doing all your partitioning activity in Windows to begin with. So because of that, we're going to choose replace a partition instead. And what we're going to be doing is clicking on the empty space. This is what we will be giving CorkOS. Here it's labeled as Ubuntu, that's just the name of the disk. So it's basically, as I said before, Kubuntu and Lubuntu. If they had a baby, it would be CorkOS. So once we do and have our partitioning selected, we will see a currents bar and an after bar. One last time, this is the process that I used to determine if a distro is considered dual boot friendly or not. If it's more difficult in any capacity, it does not go on that list. A bit of a different partitioning system that is used by some distros, particularly in those of the Fedora family. Some of them have it such that it recognizes the blank space and asks you if you want to fill it. But some distros don't actually allow you to resize a bar like so. Even though CorkOS does, not all distros will. I'll show a clip from Ultramarine Linux right now where it essentially will prompt you to install to the vacant space directly. So one last time, it's super important to click on the free space here. Once we do so, we'll see what the after result will be, where we have the boot manager. Don't worry about this second partition. We have NVMe P3. This entire yellow bar is our entire Windows install, our entire C drive. And then we see that the blank space will now become Lubuntu, or in this case, CorkOS. So once you see that this bar is satisfied, you have the empty space selected, then click next. Once you do, you'll have just your standard user setup where you'll input your name, your username, and a password. So I'm going to do that right now. Once we have all that set up, you can see there's a checkbox here to use the same password for the administrator account. I recommend having this checked if given the option. You'll definitely want your admin password to be the same as your login password for consistency's sake. Don't worry, this is not a situation where you'll have multiple passwords for online accounts. For an entirely local open source operating system install, it is perfectly fine to do. It is checked by default, so it's recommended by the developers by default, and they really do place great care into protecting user privacy and security. So we'll click next and view a summary here where we have our location, keyboard, and our partitions. And once you see all of this and you're satisfied with it, really do double check partitions once again, where you have your operating system, your Linux install, replacing specifically the empty unallocated space. Once you're satisfied with that, click install and we're ready to go. The CorkOS installer is about to make changes to your disk in order to install it, and you will not be able to undo these changes. Once you're fully satisfied, click install now and the process will begin. I'll now skip ahead to when the installation process is complete.
Alright, so the process is complete. You may now restart into your new system or continue using the operating system live environment. Once you finish playing around and testing things out, you're prompted to restart, which you can do whenever you want. So right now we have the restart now checkbox enabled, and it will trigger the restart once we click done, of which we'll do so now. So clicking the done button here will trigger a restart. I would personally recommend actually going into the boot menu. Some installations will allow you with the opportunity to unplug your USB drive, where it'll literally show a screen saying in the middle, just unplug your USB drive, then hit enter to continue. Some distros do that, others don't. So for consistency's sake, go into the boot menu and make sure your boot order is in order. At the top, you'll see we now have Ubuntu. We'll have Limpus Lite or whatever your USB is because it's still plugged in here. And then finally, the Windows Boot Manager. Don't worry about the position of your USB drive. It will be unplugged from now on regardless. What's most important is that Ubuntu or whatever distro you installed is always above Windows Boot Manager. Sometimes your USB will be actually on top of your freshly installed Linux distro. So in that way, it's very important to change the boot order if you need to. Right now, everything here looks good, so we're ready to continue. So let's hit enter here. And you can see that we're actually taken to the boot menu. This boot menu can be quite different from what you've seen before, where at the top you'll see it's called GNU Grub, and then you'll have version 2 of some kind, most likely, and then you have a bunch of your boot options here. This list, you recognize some of the options already. This menu is essentially what is called the bootloader. And the bootloader is just as simple as the name implies. It's essentially a list of options for you to decide which operating system you want to boot into. So we can see here there are multiple options. At the top here will always be, by default, your Linux installation. Then you'll have some advanced options for it. You'll have your Windows Boot Manager, and then you'll have your firmware settings. So by default, it will be this order, so you have a few seconds to choose which operating system you want to boot into. Otherwise, it will always boot into the topmost option, which by default is your current Linux install. One additional note, do not hit the escape key. It will take you to a terminal menu, and I personally don't know how to get out of it, which requires a restart. So just be sure to not hit the escape key. It's not a big deal if you do. You just need to restart, and you'll always be booted back into the bootloader here, the GNU Grub menu. And one last thing I want to mention about Grub is that it's by far the most common bootloader system. In very few cases will it be something else, but regardless, the same principles apply. So once you're ready, or you just allowed the bootloader to time out, it will always boot into your Linux operating system. Once you do select an option with the arrow keys, you will have to manually press enter or the right arrow key to do so, and we will boot directly back into Linux. We'll have a bunch of commands, a lot of text flying through the screen. Don't worry about this. A lot of other distros handle this startup process more elegantly. Regardless, it takes the same amount of time once again. Give it some time to complete, and you'll eventually be booted into the login screen, shown right here. Let's input our password and let's get going. So we have the desktop environment booting up, and we're at our desktop for the very first time after it's installed. A lot of distros will have a nice welcome screen, which will walk you through step by step everything you need to get most of the base functionality of your system up and running. For this specific login screen, we have 6 buttons to use, and we'll go through them one by one. First up, we have the desktop profiler. So here is where you can change the profile that we selected at install time. We installed the fully featured desktop with a web browser, office suites, and recommended applications. We can switch to basic and ultimately minimal. This is a Q4 OS exclusive feature, and I'll discuss this more in detail later on. You won't actually need to worry about this here, but it's really nice. You can essentially completely reset all your packages to a base state while keeping all your files. This is a feature that is not built out of the box by most distros, and this is why I love both Q4 OS and Quark OS. So let's close this window and go back to the welcome screen here. We can also install applications. If we go to this software center, we have a very base list of applications to choose from. I'm not going to install any for the purposes of this guide, but a decent amount of the base apps you'll want to use are here. Next up, we go to proprietary codecs. This is an absolute must-have. This is what allows you to play all of the most common file types like MP4s and MP3s. Fortunately, Quark OS makes it super simple. Most distros will make it super simple. Just make sure if you're prompted to install multimedia codecs or given the option, always say yes every single time. So we'll click next and just go through the process here. We actually have this setup wizard application. This is a Quark OS exclusive, and it's really reminiscent of the older days of Windows, where you have this nice sliding bar. As it increases, it installs everything, it unpacks everything. You get to actually see the process happening in real time. Very similar to Windows. Once again, not a Quark OS review. There's just a lot of things that I love about this. Once it's fully done, just click next, click finish here, and now you have all of your proprietary codecs up and running, which which will allow you to use video players and web browsers to their fullest potential, just like in Windows. Next up, we have screen scaling here, which we can click to check out the display configuration. I already changed these settings here. This is very similar to the display configuration in the Windows settings. You can play around with that if you'd like. You can see I have my external display here because I'm doing this on a capture card. So we can close that and go right back to the welcome screen. You can enable auto login if you'd like, as well as view the hardware info. So if we do here, we can see all of the information about our system right out of the gate. So we have our desktop, which is Plasma 6.6, and then we have our distro, host, kernel, and then our hardware summary here with an AMD Ryzen 7, 16 gigs of RAM, a total of 500 gigabytes of storage across all of our partitions, then the graphics card and the main board here. And then you can see there's a bunch of additional details here you can check out if you'd like. Not going to get into that. It's just really handy to have this information on hand. Once again, very similar to other distros, but it's displayed in a different way. We can check out more options here, documents online, support the developers on Patreon, or donate to QuarkOS. That I will also leave for a future video. So out of everything I described here, proprietary codecs is the most important, and that's something that every single user should do. The only other must-have requirement only applies to those who have NVIDIA graphics cards. So let's go quickly to the web browser here and just load up the documentation again, and head to section 7.4. Here we can install our NVIDIA drivers. Because they are proprietary, they're not usually provided out of the box for most distros. Some of them do, and some of them have made the process super simple graphically. If you are prompted to install them graphically, please do. Otherwise, what you'll want to do is head down to this section here where I have instructions for Ubuntu-based distros, Fedora-based distros, as well as Debian-based distros. For Arch-based distros, we assume that you know what you're doing, so we're not going to get into it there. Debian-based is a little more complicated, so I just provided some links in the documentation. For our purposes, we're going to be using the Ubuntu commands, and then the Fedora commands are quite easy as well. So we're going to be copying over this line, just installing our Ubuntu drivers. These are two variants of what I believe are the same command. I just included both to be safe. Then you'll want to go to your terminal. In the KDE desktop environment, the app is called Console, but if you search up terminal, it will come up just the same. So you see here, the terminal is loaded. So once we click that, it'll load. And then what we'll want to do here is paste in that command. So let's paste it in here and then press enter. And once you type in your password, you'll see that there are no increasing characters. This is done as a security measure. All right, so I just saw both commands. I wasn't sure which one was correct. It's definitely the second one. I'll update the documentation for that. Paste in the command sudo ubuntu-drivers install, press enter, and you'll see in the terminal, it's going to install all of the NVIDIA drivers. You'll see here in the terminal that the string NVIDIA shows up a lot. This is literally all you need to do to get your NVIDIA drivers installed. It really is just a few simple commands to get up and running, and it's just a matter of knowing them. A single command, and everything is done with very few prompts, if any. It's just pressing enter or pressing Y and then enter to just confirm a few times, but other than that, it's super simple and super streamlined. And with that, we can verify that NVIDIA is installed by typing in NVIDIA, and we can see here that at the top we have our X server settings. So if you see this program installed, it means you have successfully installed all the NVIDIA drivers. So we can just quit this, quit the terminal now. I'll delete the first one once again. Just focus on the second command here. Sudo ubuntu-drivers install. Literally just a one-line command is all you need to get all of your NVIDIA drivers. The same goes for Fedora. So on that front, if you have an NVIDIA graphics card and want to consider dual booting Windows and Linux, Ubuntu-based or Fedora-based distros are your best bet there. And from there, what you want to do is quite distro dependent. You can continue the recommended steps provided by your distro and make the choices you'd like to. And I would also recommend changing the following if needed, such as your display configuration, which I did already, to change your screen resolution and your refresh rate if needed, as well as set up auto login if you'd like, which I'd only suggest if you choose to enable drive encryption in the setup. Not required, but it is a good security practice. So if you want to reinstall Linux with drive encryption, you can do so. Next up, let's update our system. On a first-time boot, it's very critical to update your system. You can do this through your software manager's GUI if you have one, or you can open a terminal and run the command for your specific distro. So here I have some commands to update for Debian and Ubuntu-based distros, as well as Fedora. You can search up documentation yourself if you're outside of these three distro families, such as Arch. What we'll do here is head into Discover, the software center. And here is where it'll essentially be an app store interface where you can download a bunch of different amazing open source applications. There's so many to choose from here, but what you'll want to do is click updates. In the event that there's nothing to show here, we'll just use the terminal method, which is always a tried and true fallback for us. So what we'll do is just highlight this command for Debian and Ubuntu based systems, simply copy that, head to the terminal again, paste it in, and press enter.
prompted for your password again, so be sure to include it. And then what we'll see here is that everything was already set up to date, so there's nothing to do there. But if there are upgrades to make, this command will auto-install all of them. If there's nothing to upgrade, that means your system is entirely up to date. From here, you can view other resources for your specific distro of choice and set up your system as you like. There is one more optional step I would recommend to do, and that's to disable the timeout at the bootloader. This is an optional step, so feel free to skip ahead if you don't want to touch this. Essentially what you'll be doing is copying this command and pasting it into the terminal. So let's go back to the terminal right here, paste that, press enter, put in the password once more, and we'll be brought to this text file. So just before we go further with this looks very intimidating on the surface level, but all you need to know is that this command will open up a built-in text editor for the terminal. Sudo, nano, and then this specific file. All you need to do in this file is to navigate with your arrow keys. Once you see the green cursor here, it's pretty simple to navigate. It's just a matter of going to the specific lines that you need to, and you can still do all of your standard text-based changes. You can backspace a character, you can insert characters as you normally would. The only difference is you can't actually use your mouse to click anywhere. And what we're going to be doing here is modifying this grub timeout line. So by default, it will be some specific number, maybe 4 seconds, 6 seconds, 8 seconds, whichever it is. What we'll want to do here is backspace and then replace 4 with -1. -1 will mean that the timeouts for the bootloader will not be present at all, no matter how long you stay on that screen without pressing any keys. So once we change that line, you simply do Control S, and you'll see that there's rows 44 lines text pop-up that appears at the bottom of the terminal window, then Control X to exit. Then our final step here, we scroll down here and we see sudo update-grub. You'll want to copy this line back to the terminal again, paste the command, press enter, and then what it'll do is generate all of the configurations from scratch. It'll essentially load those settings into your computer's hardware. From here, paths diverge significantly based on what you want to get out of your system. This is a broad guide for setting up many distros in their default state. So from here, if you're satisfied, the world is your oyster in terms of your computer experience. If you're all satisfied with that and are ready to pursue whatever you'd like to, welcome to the world of Linux. If you feel like your Linux experience is great, we're ready to move on to Section 8. This will be quite a short section, as all we'll be doing here is fixing a time change issue that occurs when you dual boot to Windows and Linux. Essentially, if you reboot back into Windows after booting into Linux, the time tends to jump ahead. On my end, it's 4 hours because currently it's 5:45 a.m. Yes, I record early in the morning. I'm not sure why this occurs. Maybe it has something to do with how each operating system handles the time setting differently. For some reason, the time changes when you boot back into Windows. Not to worry though, there is an incredibly easy fix for this. This can be fixed with a simple registry tweak. So we're going to start by typing in the word registry in the search editor. All you need to do really is reg, and the top result should be registry editor. Press enter, accept the security prompt, and then you'll see a very Explorer-like interface that's pretty simple. Let's expand the screen, and you'll see that you have a file path system up here with a tree containing 5 folders by default. What we'll want to do is open the documentation and copy this file path. We have HKey, local machine, system, current control sets, control, and then we go all the way to time zone information. What you'll want to do is copy this actually. For some reason, a lot of tutorials just manually navigates the tree, but you don't actually need to do that. Just simply highlight the top path right here, click paste, and then press enter, and you'll be brought exactly to all of the relevant registry keys. Right-click in an empty area on the window and create a new dword value. Its name should be real-time is universal. Back to registry editor, we can right-click, highlight or renew, and click dword. Then what you'll want to do is type in real-time is universal with the first word of each being capitalized and no spaces. Real-time is universal, and press enter. Now that we've created a dword, what we need to do is set its value to 1. Simply right-click the newly created key and click modify. Here you'll have some value data. All you need to do is change this 0 to 1, and then the time change should be fixed on a reboot. Let's verify that now. Now we see on screen that the time is 5:50, confirming that this simple change works. To be super thorough, let's boot into Linux and make sure that the time is correct there too. And we can see in the bottom right, it's now 5:52 a.m. This means that the Linux time is always correct, and we only need to make that modification on the Windows side of things to ensure that our time is now consistent. That's all there is to the time change in Section 8. At long last, we've made it to Section 9, the final major one of this extensive guide.
This is a section covering a part of the Linux installation process that I see way too few people talking about. There's a lot of talk about how one of the greatest things that Linux provides is the option variety, and how easily you can switch from one distro to another if you're not satisfied. While the switching process is true, there is a bit more technical know-how required that most folks don't talk about, as the process of completely removing Linux from your system is slightly more involved than meets the eye. It's nothing critical, and you absolutely can just delete your partition in disk management and install a new distro, no problem in a lot of cases. But to be super thorough, super complete, and avoid a disorganized mess in the boot menu, we'll need to do something a little more. Not to worry though, the documentation in section 9 covers this process from start to finish, and it's really manageable once you break it down step by step. Let's get into that now. Switching over to our laptop screen, what we'll want to do is head over to PowerShell one last time. Accept the security prompt, and let's run some commands one by one. First, after opening it as an administrator, you'll want to type in disk parts, all as one string. Press enter, then run list disk to list out all the disks. So right now I have just disk 0 and disk 1. Disk 1 is my 8GB USB drive that we installed QuarkOS to, and disk 0 is the disk that contains the main Windows installation. Find the one that corresponds to you. The size of it will pretty much indicate which one it is every time, but if you're absolutely in doubt, you can also open up disk management to be absolutely sure. You'll see that disk 0 contains your C drive, so that's the one we're going to select. To do so, type in SEL disk and the corresponding number for your disk. So we'll select 0 and press enter. We see disk 0 is now the selected disk. Next up, you'll want to type in list part, and we'll see all of the partitions on our disk. Type in SEL space part, and then the number corresponding to our system partition, which in most cases will be 1. Just find the one where it says system and press enter. Next, we'll want to assign this partition a drive letter. Type in the word assign, so ASSIGN, space letter, so the word letter, equals, and then give it a letter. In our documentation, we're going to go with a capital N, as that's an unused drive letter for most cases, but if it is used, you can just use whatever letter you'd like. And then you'll see that disk part successfully assigned the drive letter or mount point. Now you can exit disk part by typing in the word exit. So we'll do that now. Press enter. You'll see that we're back in the standard PowerShell file path. Next up, we'll want to run the following command: cd space n:/EFI. And what this will do is navigate directly into the EFI folder in our newly created N drive. Press enter, and you'll see that we're in our newly created drive. If we head over to Windows Explorer, we can see that this exists as well. If we head over to this PC, we can see that there's a local disk right here. We don't have permission to access this folder, but if we click continue, we'll see that we've been denied permission to it. So that means, unfortunately, we cannot access the N drive from Windows Explorer. We have to do it through the command line. So hopefully the steps I'm showing are easy to follow thus far, as we're almost there. Next up, we'll want to type in ls or dir. So ls will work just fine, and dir will also work just fine. In PowerShell, each of these commands do the same thing, where it essentially lists out all of the different boot entries we have. And this is where you'll see, for all of you distro hoppers out there, if you install a bunch of different distros, you'll notice that this list will fill up quite quickly, especially if you install different distro varieties. For example, there could be Ubuntu, Debian, Fedora, Arch, and other names depending on how many distros you install. This list gets messy real quickly, and the reason why we want to remove entries in this particular folder is because otherwise our boot menu, when we go into our BIOS/UEFI settings, will have quite the long list, and it'll be a confusing nightmare to navigate. Imagine you install 3 Ubuntu-based distros, 3 Fedora-based distros, and 2 Arch-based distros, let's say, and a Debian-based distro. Depending on the naming conventions, a lot of them list out just the grandfather of the distro families, so you can imagine how much of a nightmare that is to navigate. To clear out all that mess, what we'll want to do is locate any names of distros you know you want to get rid of, or you know that are no longer installed. So in this case, we choose Ubuntu. We type in rmdir space, and then the name of the folder. So we will remove Ubuntu as shown. And just to be clear, once you run this command, the boot entry is completely gone. So be absolutely sure that you do not want to boot into your Linux install anymore. So before you enter this command, it is super imperative to back up your files, as I've shown in section 2. Once you're fully satisfied and are ready to remove your Linux install, simply press enter. You'll get a confirmation menu here too. This is just a prompt that everything inside this folder will also be deleted, which is what we want. Type in Y, press enter. Now that boot entry is completely gone. One last thing I should mention is to never remove the Microsoft or boot folders. Those are absolutely paramount to keep. If you delete them, you will lose access to your Windows install and will need to install Windows entirely from a USB once again. So be sure to only remove folders that you recognize the name of. We are almost done. All we need to do is run some cleanup commands. So let's go back into disk part, and you can simply press the up arrow to revisit the disk part command, or you could just type it in, press enter, and now we select our disk and partition as before. Cell disk 0, cell part 1, and then instead of the word assign, we type in the word remove. To unmount that drive letter, we simply type in remove letter equals N. Press enter, and now you'll see we've successfully removed it. To verify this, let's go back into Windows Explorer once again, and you'll see that the N drive is completely gone. You can close PowerShell, and you're done. Let's go into our disk management utility. You'll see that your partition containing your data is still there, but your ability to access it in your Linux install is now completely gone, as warned about earlier. So now we assume you're completely ready to delete this partition. All you need to do here is right-click the partition and click Delete Volume. Do we want to delete this partition? We click Yes here. And once we do, you'll see that this partition becomes unallocated space, right here. This is exactly the partition we created before to install Linux on. From this point, if you want to reinstall a completely different distro, you can go ahead and do so. Otherwise, if you simply want to stick entirely with Windows and give all this space back to your C drive, simply right-click your C drive and click Extend Volume. You'll be brought to the Extend Volume wizard, of which you'll just follow the prompts. Just click Next. There are some additional options you can do. You can literally just click Next because the amount of space that the C drive claims is already the maximum. Just click Next and click Finish. And once you do, all of your storage is given right back to your C drive, and there's not a trace of your current Linux installed to be found. We are now finished with the guide. This concludes the ultimate dual booting guide for safely installing both Windows and Linux on the same drive. With this knowledge, hopefully your experience using your computer is now at its maximum potential. Whether you use this guide because you want to tinker with Linux for the first time safely, maybe you want to primarily use Linux but still need Windows for a few select applications, or even starting your journey to ditch Windows entirely, I hope at least some parts of this guide were beneficial for you in some capacities. I designed it such that there are at least some sections which should provide incredible value for most people. If that's how you feel at the end of it all, I effectively did what I set out to do. If you have any further questions or concerns, or if you want to discuss how well you thought my first tutorial video ever created was, feel free to do so in the comments or contact me with the links I provided. A link to the documentation will be at the top of the description. I will also add any corrections I need to make in the pinned comment. The documentation will provide all of the links, and I will update it accordingly as new questions roll in. I hope I was super thorough, and I hope the documentation I made was super readable. This, in addition to being a guide, is my love letter and magnum opus to the Linux community. I hope I made you all proud. Thank you so much for watching. Here's to more Linux in the world. Stay safe and peace out.